welcome to Hunter Ash, right?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks again for being willing to talk about the subject. Today, we're going to talk about why you're a Trump voter and why the issue of free speech is so important to you, and also why Trump embodies the values that you're pursuing. Does that sound accurate?
Yeah, more or less. And yeah, thanks so much for having me on. I'm excited to talk to somebody who's obviously intelligent and articulate and who shares a lot of my values and who disagrees with me. It's generally where productive discussion happens, in my experience.
Yeah, I look forward to these conversations as well. Do you want to give like a quick introduction about who you are?
Yeah, sure. So as you said, my name's Hunter. I have my background is in math and physics. I've done a lot of things. I've been a very entry-level software dev for a while. I was an actuary, and currently I teach statistics mostly to tech and finance professionals. I also have been a Democrat and to a large extent a progressive for most of my life. You know, my presidential voting record, including primaries, is Bernie, uh, Clinton, Warren, and then Biden. And this election cycle is the first votes I've ever cast for Republicans for any office. So
Okay. And you already voted for Trump for 2024. I saw you posted a screenshot of your.
Yeah, I voted early. Yeah.
Yeah. And you told me the reason why was largely because free speech is the number one issue for you, right?
Free speech is a big one, together with a lot of things that I think, at least to some degree, are downstream of free speech, like, technological progress and economic growth. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you and I share some overlap because I'm a free speech maximalist, is how I used to say. You probably don't know this, but I used to work for the ACLU back before they went crazy. And that's probably also another overlap in that we'll get to talking about, I guess, like anti-wokeness and DEI, but we probably agree on a lot of those issues. So you're not trying to convert me on the values of free speech to begin with. You're just explaining why you believe Trump embodies them.
Yeah. I think that's an accurate position statement.
Okay. And I want to start with basics. What do you consider free speech, and like why is it important to you?
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to start because I don't have a narrowly legalistic definition of free speech, right? So, I definitely do care that free speech is embodied in law and imposes restrictions on governments. But I also care about substantive free speech, right? So a situation where, the owners of every, major, I'm not saying this is what's happened, but, hypothetically, a situation where the owners of every major traditional and social media platform sort of colluded to impose the same sets of restrictions on everyone, even if there was legitimately no government inducement to do this, either, official or unofficial, would still, in my view, be a very bad state of affairs. So I guess you could say I'm a little bit consequentialist about free speech, right? It's not just about checking these legal boxes.
One of the ways, I agree with you. One of the ways I've seen that distinction made is that there's the First Amendment, which only applies to the government and it provides a legal framework for protections. And then there's also a more amorphous culture of free speech where, you don't yell at people, you don't try to shun people for having the wrong opinions, so to speak. So you think both of those are important, and both of those could be affected by a Trump presidency, right?
Yeah, I do. I think that, both the actual governmental attempts at censorship and the sort of the culture and a lot of the sort of indirect pressuring that is sometimes downstream of the government and is sometimes, based on people just sort of like reading the room, right? Taking the social temperature. I think both of those things will net get better under Trump, right? So I acknowledge that, I'm not a Trump sycophant, right? I don't think that the man has no flaws, including on this issue. But when I think about the sort of the total climate that I project would be created by a Harris presidency versus a Trump presidency, I think that the latter is very definitely preferable.
Okay. You also previously mentioned like part of the reason why you believe in free speech, and just to get I guess like to make sure that we're on the same page verbiage wise. When we're talking about free speech, we're talking about expression being unfettered, being allowed to speak, being free from government suppression, and also having an environment where that is encouraged, where dissent is encouraged. Is that fair?
Yeah, where you won't be fired from your job, you won't be denied like a tenure track career in academia. You will be able to get a job as a journalist, etc. Right? If you even if you say things that are not only against the sort of prevailing orthodoxy, but things that are genuinely unpopular. Right? I think that we should encourage a culture where we reduce this tendency to socially and economically penalize people.
Yeah. And you mentioned you had your epistemology is Popperian. I can't say that. Popperian?
Popperian.
Popperian. English
Popper, yeah.
language. So that was like one of the reasons why you believe free speech is good. It's, as you said, it's more consequentialist rather than the principle. Can you expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So Karl Popper was, in my view, certainly the most important epistemologist of the 20th century, one of the most important ever. And he created a theory of how knowledge is produced, right? Which is kind of, at least one way to describe what epistemology studies, that fundamentally differed from previous theories of knowledge, which were largely based on authority, right? Either the authority of a person or the authority of a process, right? So, the personally authoritative theories of knowledge are mostly sort of traditional and pre-modern and found in, a lot of religions, right? That like the person, the infallibility of the Pope is a great example, right? Like he has a special connection to the truth. And so he, the things that he says should be considered differently from how you would consider them if a different person said the exact same thing. And then theories of knowledge that consider processes authoritative are, that's most of traditional epistemology, I guess you could say, right? The justified true belief model, or, sort of a narrow reading of the scientific method, right? And I think that although a lot of people wouldn't endorse this explicitly, functionally, you see a very sort of process authority-based theory of knowledge in a lot of society today, right? Where like somehow people think that like the very specific and contingent historical institution of peer review is like intimately, almost like ontologically tied to the truth status of claims, right? Popper's model is fundamentally different in that it's described a lot of ways. People call it falsificationism, right? Ideas should be able to be falsified, but I think the best way to
falsifiability is like one of my favorite concepts ever.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I mean it's critical, and it's such an easy way to weed out, like dishonest nonsense claims. Or even dishonest, interlocutors. But the way I like to describe Popper's theory of knowledge is that it's evolutionary, basically, right? And this was sort of, given new language and expanded on by Dawkins. But the idea is that ideas, memes, right, are under evolutionary pressures just like biological organisms are, right? And it's just true as a matter of fact, right? It has that same almost tautological feel that biological evolution does, that ideas that are successful in getting themselves copied will sort of dominate the future, right? And an idea, no matter what its other virtues, that is not able to get itself copied won't end up mattering, right? It won't have any causal impact, no matter how amazing of an idea it might have been. And the reason why...
a rabbit hole. This might be going down a rabbit hole, but you don't consider every religion to be true, right?
No, absolutely. And that, it is kind of a rabbit hole, but I do think it's really interesting in that I do believe that any idea that successfully reproduces itself reliably encodes knowledge about something, right? It just might not be knowledge about its explicit contents, right? So I think, to the extent that religions succeed, they do so because they encode in their structure in some way truths about human psychology and human organization, right?
But you could
Because,
have a mimetic belief system that is really, really good at replicating itself, but terrible at finding truth, right?
yeah, absolutely. It's terrible at finding explicit truth, right? In the same way that like the genome of a bird, right, sort of tacitly encodes information about aerodynamics, right? And then it codes for the shape of the wing, and the wing is shaped that way because of, the way aerodynamics works, right? I think in the same way, religions sort of implicitly encode information about human psychology, but their explicit content is generally false, right? That would be my take on this, right? And so all successful memes encode some knowledge in some way, but the ones that really drive society forward are the ones whose like replication strategy is based on the truth of their explicit contents, basically, right? So this is why we still study Newton's laws, after 350 years, is because they're useful, and they're useful because they accurately map part of reality, right? And so there are lots of ways for memes to be successful that don't involve their explicit content being true, or even them being particularly useful to us, in that they succeed mostly by suppressing dissent, right?
Yeah. The
And
example I have in mind is like the best way I explain it to people, because I'm in accord with your ideas here. But the people that don't believe in gravity are not going to reproduce. Like that, there's just like a very stark error correcting mechanism in place for those that don't believe in gravity. So belief in gravity, by definition of being true, and that it allows you to predict the world and then avoid falling to your death, that's going to replicate more. So we're talking about just like a mimetic ecosystem that provides competition, allows the best ideas to move forward. That's the primary reason why you believe in free speech, right?
Yeah, exactly. Right. So, a situation where no set of ideas is allowed to suppress mutation, basically, right? Mimetic mutation, and eliminate its competition by means other than reason, is like really the only environment that's going to favor useful ideas in the long run, right? Ideas that are useful to individuals, right? Because otherwise you're tempted to believe things because of social pressure, or to avoid being executed by the agents of the the sort of suppressive memeplex, right?
Yeah.
And
So
so
you and I agree completely on this point, which is why I'm puzzled by some of your positions, and I'm excited to like dissect them further.
yeah,
So I'm sure we can talk about Karl Popper for hours.
yeah.
To make it more concrete, can you like sketch out what are some policies that you support for with regards to free speech? So, for example, should social media companies have any content restrictions that they place on themselves?
I think that there are a few, edge cases of like really extreme behavior that it does no damage to the ecosystem to sort of regulate away, and nor does it create like a really bad precedent, right? So having policies against stalking, for example, I think that's
Okay.
right. Having policies against and this is traditionally how the courts have interpreted the First Amendment also, but against imminent calls to lawless action, right?
Mhm.
So I even think it should be allowed for people to say like I think that we should overthrow the government or something,
Yeah.
right? I think people should be allowed to say that. But if you say, let's go, hey, you specific group of people, let's go burn down that police station, right? I think that I agree with the courts basically in their interpretation of the First Amendment, and as it would apply to social media. I also think it's
that's the legal basis. That's referred to as the Brandenburg test, and I also agree with it. Even though I claim to be a free speech maximalist, that feels good, like a reasonable restriction in context. Does that mean that you believe that social media companies, private companies, should adopt the same standard as the First Amendment legal standard?
I think there are a few other types of speech where I'm not necessarily saying I want them all to regulate these things, but I don't think it would be a big infringement, right? So like things like sexual content or gore, snuff films, those kinds of things, right? I think individual platforms can make their own choices about those things, and it doesn't really create any kind of sense of concept creep, right? Those are very well defined and not really about debating ideas or anything.
Yeah, I think they're mostly well defined. There are edge cases. There was a funny one about Facebook where they prohibited the female nudity, but then a bunch of breastfeeding groups got banned, and so they were kind of like continuously trying to figure out how do we ban this but not that, and they had to get creative with how they write the rules on that. It's similar to, I don't know if Instagram like bans female nipples but not male nipples. There's definitely like an incoherency applied to that. Do you think these standards should like, meaning your standard, do you think it should apply to like all private? Like, I'm trying to sketch out the contours of this. Like if there is, like, I have a Substack, I generally don't delete comments unless they're just completely off topic. So I have a rule that off topic comments get deleted. Do you think that's bad?
No, I don't think that's bad. I sort of, and again, these aren't, really about laws I would want to pass or anything. These are just like what I think it would be good for people to do. And I think that generally the smaller a platform is, the more I think it's okay for that to be highly curated, right? I would even be okay with a situation where, people can create like little sub networks on social media platforms and write their own rules, right? I'm perfectly fine with people sort of selecting into narrow, restricted environments because they want to talk about specific things and they don't want that to be flooded with, just nonsense or slurs or something, right? So like, unfortunately, the way that it's worked out with the sort of capture of most moderation positions, it's not a good example in practice. But in principle, I think something like Reddit's model, where, you can have a community that's for bird watching, right? And they don't just restrict, like dangerous, unpopular, heterodox ideas, right? They'll restrict you if you post about hippos because this is about bird watching, right? So that kind of thing I think is fine. But if you're a platform that's attempting to be a general purpose public square, then I would want those platforms to really adopt like pretty much the minimal standard possible.
How would you enforce that? There's the cultural aspect. I understand that part, but would you ask for legislation?
I would probably see that as a last resort, right? I do think keeping the public square open is really important, and I would hope that we could do so by other means, right? I hope that we could do so either via competition or via public pressure campaigns, right? Those kinds of things. But ultimately, if the choice is between, sort of standing on the principle that the government shouldn't tell these companies what to do or having no effective public square anymore, I'll give up that principle and use the heavy hand of the state. But hopefully that will never be necessary.
So can you, have we gotten close to that where you think, how far away are we from you believing that legislation to keep large social media platforms, to prevent them from censoring too much? Like, how far away from that position are we?
I would say we are the exact distance of Elon Musk's ownership of X, right? Given that X exists, the other ones being pretty censorious to various degrees is less of a catastrophe because people who want to have these conversations still have a place to do it. It's highly populated, has a lot of users, and can get your content in front of some of the most powerful people in the world. As long as even one of those exists, I wouldn't want to do this. But if efforts like we're seeing out of the EU and Brazil, right, to restrict content on X, or to try to essentially force him to sell it, or force him to adopt their standards, are successful, then I mean, I would feel pretty pessimistic about the chances of even being able to organize such an effort or pass such legislation, but I would at least support it at that point.
Okay, so one way you can have, let me see. One way you can reduce censorship on big tech, on social media platforms, is just by offering more options and also by offering yourself as an example. So the fact that Elon Musk adopts different terms of service is a way of, adding to the mimetic ecosystem in terms of how media platforms are run.
Yeah.
Do you, if a large platform just doesn't want to be associated with certain, whatever, like profanity or nudity, is that okay for them to prohibit it?
Yeah, I'm actually okay with specifically the two cases that you mentioned, because neither of them, there's no idea that you can't communicate without those things, basically, right?
Okay.
So yeah, that would not, I don't, I personally would think a profanity ban is a little, prudish, like a little bit precious, but I don't see it as like an egregious enough violation that I would be like really up in arms about it, right? Maybe they want it to be kid friendly or something, right? That's fine.
What about racist language?
Yeah,
Or ideas they consider racist?
right. And this is where, it goes off the deep end, because that is just such an open-ended category, right? And it's because of its essentially infinite pliability, it's prone to abuse in a way that really does have a significant effect on the public conversation, right? So like, take an account like I/O that was banned on Twitter before it became X.
That was previously known as monitoring bias.
Yes, exactly, right? They were banned on old Twitter for posting like FBI crime statistics, right? Government crime statistics. They would just post charts, right? And they got banned. And that to me is
specifically, it's because government crime statistics show a stark racial disparity in terms of who
exactly
crime.
Yeah, they show a group difference, right? And to this day, right, like I/O is very sort of moderate and cautious about talking about causes of group differences, and merely presents the indisputable fact that today they exist across a wide range of domains, right? Like today.
Did he get banned under Musk's Twitter?
No, he got banned under former Twitter.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, that would be a situation where I would want to use whatever levers are possible to either diminish the importance of that social media platform or to force them to reform their policies, right? Now, if it's just about like saying slurs or something, again, there's no idea you can't communicate without a slur. So that wouldn't trigger the same reaction in me. But these are really, crime is a really policy relevant concern, right? And if people are sort of at scale kept from accessing basic information about things that affect their daily lives and that might affect, what policies they want to support, what politicians at both the national and local level they might want to vote for, then that's really dangerous. So yeah, that last one you said is where I think it does cross the line, unless it's very narrowly, constrained.
Do you have like concerns about the motives of someone that would impose something like that, like in terms of service that said no racist language?
Yeah, I do. It's not necessary to oppose that for me to psychoanalyze them, but I will say, I do, sort of assume certain things about them are probably true, given that they would want to do that. Namely, that I would assume that they are invested in equity ideology, right? Whatever we want to, whatever this people call it a million different things, woke or whatever. But I would assume that these people believe that silencing discussion of group differences is an effective way to remedy those group differences. And I think that's about, the most dangerous idea possible, right? Just that's the kind of thing that Karl Popper was talking about in his paradox of tolerance. This has been totally misinterpreted on the left to mean almost the exact opposite of what it means. But the kind of intolerance he was talking about was intolerance of ideas, basically, right? People who are not interested in rational discussion and ultimately seek to suppress it by non-rational means, which is to say coercion, right? And that was Popper's one exception for kinds of ideas that he is okay with suppressing, right? That in order to maintain a liberal society, we do have to sort of, stamp out any incipient efforts to close that down, right? So
yeah, I say it's kind of like a peace treaty where this area you don't touch. So like if you were like running your own social media platform, you wouldn't include a ban on racist language. And if someone did start their own social media platform and put a ban on a racist language, you'd be suspect of that, right?
And yeah, absolutely. I would encourage people not to use it. I would try to, punish them for that decision, basically.
And you mentioned like you would assume that they're trying to push like an agenda, like a DEI, a diversity, equity, inclusion agenda, especially if they have prohibitions on like references based on religion, discriminatory references based on religion, race, gender, national origin, that sort of thing. Like you'd be suspect of that.
Yeah, it would be suspect of that.
Yeah. So I just read off of Truth Social's terms of service. Why do you think Trump is putting these restrictions on his own social media platform?
I assume it's ego driven, or because he outsourced this work to somebody else. I don't know. I've never used Truth Social. It doesn't seem like a very highly populated or salient platform. But yeah, I mean, it's perfectly easy for me to admit that I didn't know that those were in the terms of service. But if they are, then yeah, I mean, I think that's that.
I'll send you the link to the terms of service. Okay. Because I find it interesting. I don't know no one fucking reads terms of service, period. And I like looking through it. I would recommend going to section 10, guidelines for reviews, ratings, or comments. And it shows everything that you can be banned for on Truth Social. Do you have it up?
Let's see. I'm refreshing right now. Did you send me an email or?
Well, it was just like a chat on Zencaster.
Oh, okay. I see. Yeah. Okay. Number 10, you said?
Yeah, section 10.
Okay.
And I can edit this out. I'm not trying to like put you on the spot. I'm not trying to be unfair.
No, you're fine. Yeah. I mean, like this seems like just straightforwardly bad and against the stated purpose of this social media company. I would be interested to see to what extent these things are enforced, right? Because at least in the way that DEI people typically interpret these things, like probably a lot of Trump's posts would qualify for one of these things. So
that's what I find most puzzling about it. Does this change your opinion of Trump at all in any direction, no matter how minuscule?
Yeah. I mean, it tells me, it incrementally downgrades my sort of confidence in his ability to effectively like delegate tasks in an organization. I mean, doesn't meaningfully change what I think the net effects of a Trump presidency would be. But yeah, that's a shame. He shouldn't do that, and like clearly he, either doesn't really understand what's at play here and like where these sorts of things, where these sorts of attitudes typically come from or what they represent. And he just thinks this is boilerplate, or he's completely unaware of this. And it was chosen by somebody that he delegated to, in which case he did a bad job doing that.
Yeah. My initial assumption is that it was boilerplate, but when I read through it, there's terms that just don't make any sense to me. And I'm a lawyer. One of the prohibitions is that your post should not contain references to any illegal activity. What?
like references, right? Like, so you can't even say somebody just mugged me because
right.
mugging,
I
right?
have no idea what that means or how that's enforced. I don't think I've seen this in any other terms of service of any other major platform.
Mhm.
They usually say like you can't, encourage or advocate or facilitate criminal activity, which makes sense. Like you don't want people using Facebook to traffic guns or something like that. I don't know.
Right, right.
And then there's also, you can read through it. Like you should not make any conclusions as to the legality of conduct in your interactive content. I don't know what that means either. You're just like,
Yeah.
if you say, I'm skateboarding and it's legal on the street, that would not be permitted by on Truth Social.
Right, right. What,
Um,
yeah, this is really weird language. I'm super curious who wrote this because again, you have, you know, obviously a lot more legal expertise than I do, but it does strike me that this is beyond, being sort of definitely a lot more restrictive than I would want. It also just seems kind of amateurish.
I mean, I'm kind of used to amateurism from anyone related to Trump.
Yeah,
My
sure.
opinions on this are obvious.
Yeah.
Uh, the second one was like, you may not post any false, unlawful, threatening, defamatory, harassing, misleading statements. That is boilerplate. A lot of platforms have that. Do you have
Yeah.
an issue with it?
My issue would mainly be with false and false, defamatory, and misleading out of that list because those are
Yeah,
all those all presuppose a magical truth oracle that knows exactly what is false. And for again,
yeah.
I agree with the U.S. standard on defamation, which is very different from Europe's god awful standards. Where in the U.S., truth is an absolute defense against claims of defamation. So again, that term presupposes, an oracle essentially, which is not good.
A lot of this will depend on how exactly it's enforced. I agree with that, and it doesn't strike me as with. I don't have a lot of high confidence in how it's going to be implemented, just given how ambiguous and vague and nonsensical
Yeah.
some of these terms are. Uh, what's interesting is that after the numbered list, there's a part that says we may accept, reject, or remove interactive content which is posted in our sole discretion.
Mm-hmm.
So they list out a bunch of rules, and then at the end they say basically, "Fuck you, we can do whatever we want,
Mm-hmm.
regardless of these rules." I tried to see if any other social media platform has this kind of catch-all provision that
Mm-hmm.
says no matter what the rules say, we can do whatever we want. I
Mm-hmm.
haven't been able to find anything like that. It's possible that it's out there. I haven't. I mean, it's annoying reading terms of service.
Right.
Uh,
Yeah.
but that part, I don't see that that's boilerplate, except maybe for like tiny, Etsy shops or
Mm-hmm.
something like that. That just say we can remove whatever we want because fuck you.
Right.
Uh, that's probably the part that I find most concerning in these
Yeah.
terms of service. What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah. Again, I mean, I think there's a reason why. I believe the timeline is that Trump started Truth Social and then Musk bought X, right? And
Yeah,
I think that there's sort of a reason why Musk went through with that, right? Which is that like this is obviously not a very well run or highly populated platform. And I agree that if it were, that would not be great because these policies seem sort of dictatorial and arbitrary, and I don't think it would make a good town square. So yeah.
why do you think it hasn't been changed? Because it seems like, especially given, I'm asking like in the context of how Truth Social is presented as a counter to the narrative among right-wing politicians and influencers that says, big tech is censoring our opinions. We
Mhm.
need, I almost was going to say safe space. I don't mean that derogatorily. We need a space where we can express our opinions. And that's
Mhm.
where Social was heralded as an option within that ecosystem.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so I think the reason why it hasn't been changed and why I would guess, and again, I'm guessing, but that these things rarely get enforced is just because I assume it's pretty much, in partisan terms, a monochromatic space, right? It's Trump's social media platform. I really doubt there are a lot of Democrats on there. You know what I mean? So probably everyone's so ideologically aligned already that like people aren't doing a lot of like reporting of each other. You know, there aren't like these big disagreements and stuff. So yeah, I mean, it seems like essentially kind of a playpen, frankly.
So if I say Trump is not interested in free speech based on the fact that when he created his own social media platform, he put in terms of service that are even more restrictive than other platforms. Would that be an unfair conclusion for me to draw?
No, and you know, I'm probably going to surprise you with this one, but I'm not sure that Trump has any kind of deep ideological commitment to free speech. You know, I'm not sure that that's a
So
principle that's
I
like
agree,
super
I agree
important
with
to
you on
him.
that.
You know, I don't think he necessarily has like a specific you know, philosophical position on this issue one way or the other. You know, I think he talks about it because currently in most places the weight of censorship sort of leans against his tribe. And so, you know, advocating for, you know, a sort of universal good sounding thing like free speech is currently instrumentally useful. But yeah, no, it's really no part of my decision calculus to believe that he is in a deep principled way committed to free speech.
But doesn't that leave the open possibility that he can suppress free speech?
It leaves open the possibility, but I think it's a lot less likely. And this is, you know, I think sort of the root of our probably our
Well,
substantive disagreement, right? Is that I can completely concede most of your, you know, most of the reasons why you don't like Trump, right? And why you're not voting for him. And you know, I read the essay you sent me that related to, you know, the concept of error correction, which is
Elements
also,
against
you know,
versus ideas, where I talk about the hurricane map. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, exactly, right. And I, you know, I can basically swallow that whole. The issue to me is that Trump is basically like the criticisms of Trump are basically about one guy, right? There's this one guy, and you know, he's erratic. He doesn't seem to have you know, like super well defined, consistent principles all the time. He's, you know, he's egotistical, right? He lashes out at people that he perceives as having insulted him. You know, he very much you know, engages in kind of a, you know, a Schmittian, like, you know, friend enemy, you know, heavy friend enemy distinction. All those things are true. What I see on the opposite side is not like also one person who has those characteristics, right? I see a well entrenched machine that stretches across like huge swaths of our government, of traditional media, and of academia, large parts of, you know, sort of the so-called like international community, right? Like diplomats, you know, a lot of like EU regulators, right? I see this huge machine that is so much bigger than any one person, and that does not only want to censor criticism of itself, but wants essentially an unlimited license to suppress anything that they deem to be misinformation, right? You know, the scheme is basically like, okay, so we've decided that if you say something that all the experts disagree with, we can censor you, and also we're all the experts, right? And I just see that as like just so drastically greater a threat than one man's ego. And I think that Trump is a Trump administration is likely to, again, maybe for reasons that have nothing to do with principle. That doesn't especially matter to me. Um,
Well,
Maybe
we can
just out of
we can
vengeance or something, will
right just
destroy
like
this machine.
streamline the conversation. We don't have to like turn this into like a Trump hate hour. It's more in the context of we don't even have to get into what he believes, whether he's principled or a hypocrite. Doesn't really matter.
Yeah,
I'm fine with focusing on just the consequences
yeah,
of the Trump presidency versus a Kamala Harris presidency.
yeah,
Like one of the reasons I don't like Trump,
yeah,
there's many, but one of them is what I outlined in Dudes versus Ideas. It's that he encourages this culture of idiocy, ignorance, where if anyone disagrees with him, he will like move hell and earth to make sure to pretend that he was right all along. And
Good.
so that tends to encourage this culture of servility, submissiveness from people around him who are afraid to challenge him. So it's exactly the same concerns that you have about error correction from like a Popperian standpoint. You want a robust mimetic ecosystem. And I see Trump as a danger to that. Where do you think I'm wrong?
So the thing is, I see those tendencies in Trump as most likely to essentially hamper his own efforts, right? This is like, it's sort of similar to a way a lot of people describe the situation with Putin's overconfidence going into the Ukraine war, right? Which is essentially that he created a culture around him where nobody wanted to tell him anything he didn't want to hear. And so he ended up in a heavily skewed information environment and drastically overestimated Russia's capabilities going into this war, right? That is what I see as the most likely effect of, to the extent that Trump has similar tendencies. The most likely effect is that
I want to make sure that I understand that. Do you mean that the most likely effect is that it's only going to affect him?
Yeah, mostly. I mean, obviously, he's the president, right? He controls a lot of policy, but he was also, president for 4 years, and he didn't launch a giant war or anything. But as a result of
I never claimed
tendency.
that he would.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to make sure that my argument is grounded within the topic that we're discussing. And I'm making a culture argument. He encourages a culture that the only way you thrive is by affirming and validating the guy in the middle. So it's beyond just like one man's ego, to the extent that he has an influence on the culture.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I'm going to be able to argue for this. It's just sort of an assertion based on, looking around and, seeing what I think is more and less plausible. But I imagine that he will create that culture in his administration. I don't think that, like random Fortune 500 CEOs are going to start behaving this way in like sort of, mimesis of him or something. And,
I don't expect the random CEOs to behave that way. I expect more and more of his followers will feel emboldened by his second, more and more of his delusional followers, I should say, will feel emboldened by his second presidency and just become more and more unhinged. Maybe this is unsaid, but I also mentioned, like, I used to, I applied to work for Trump's presidency in 2016. I'm just like a bog standard libertarian. I didn't have any, I was kind of puzzled by him, cautious. I didn't have anything against him, at least at first. And the concern that I have is I just think Republicans have gotten insane. Like the level of unhinged conspiracies that I regularly encounter is very, very depressing. Like I talked about, this was in another piece, but on the topic of immigration, like one of the common talking points from Musk, J.D. Vance, and Trump and others is that Democrats are intentionally opening the border to allow illegal immigrants in so that they register them to vote. Like there's something, it's just so stupid that I feel like I'm getting punked having to respond to that. And it makes me really sad that that's part of the discourse, because it clouds out something much more reasonable that I can discuss with, I'm in favor of more open immigration, and I'm happy to discuss restrictions, but I can't talk to someone who I think is just delusional.
Sure. I understand. If you'd like, I can give you the Steelman version of that claim, right? Which is, it's not that.
I know I can do a Steelman, but that's stain washing. I can't, if I have to rehabilitate someone's argument so that it's much actually tethered to reality, then it's not their argument anymore.
When I say that, I mean,
I have to do.
When I say that, I mean that, like, this isn't, like a gloss I feel like I'm applying over. Let's take Musk, for example, right? Like I've seen him talk about in interviews that, his specific concern is not so much that they, like, illegal immigrants will vote when they are illegal is concern. And, sentiments like this have been expressed by, Chuck Schumer, other, I believe Kamala, right? But the fear is that these people will be legalized en masse and then will be a sort of very reliable Democratic voting base. And again, this isn't something that I'm just sort of, reading into what they say to make it more plausible. This is my read on a lot of these people's positions. Sure, there are people who,
that's it, but that's sane washing. You're rehabilitating the position to make it more tethered to reality, more palatable. You can do that to any crazy position. I mean, the same thing happened when Trump said they're eating the dogs, they're eating the cats. You have his entourage saying, well, what he really means is that Springfield, Ohio is suffering from having too many new people coming in. It's like the second one is like coherent, defensible, and you can work with. But the first one is just crazy. And my problem is there's just way too many crazy claims floating around. And then there's kind of like a smaller island of sane washers that try to launder this insanity and to make it something more presentable. I see that as a problem for free speech.
So I guess I could turn this around on you a little bit. How do you think that a Harris presidency will make this problem better? How will she tone down the crazies in a way that's compatible with your views on free speech?
I think Trump draws a lot of his power from memes. A lot of his followers just are. I'm not going to be charitable on this, and despite my best efforts, but a lot of his followers are drawn to him because of mimetic influence. I think a lot of them would be fairly characterized as being in a cult. They just see him as this great man of history, and they're willing to do whatever he wants. So the only way to really degrade this culture of personality that has propped up around Trump is for him to lose, or for him to just continue becoming more and more senile. So I don't think Kamala herself, I don't really care what she does. There's not really a policy proposal that she's going to pursue that I'm agitating for. It's more that Trump loses. That's what I want from like a cultural aspect. So it's not really policy based. It's more of I just need him. I think the only way to break the fever is for him to be embarrassed, humiliated on the national stage. I think that's probably the best case, but I could be wrong. It's a prediction.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're right. So your view is that whatever segment of the population, we're talking about, that, we probably both agree on a lot of subjects, at least, is kind of epistemologically deranged, right? Your view is that if Trump, this is entirely sort of caused by, or primarily at least caused by Trump, and that when Trump goes away, these people will return to like a grounded, sane worldview.
I would hope that they return to a grounded, sane worldview. I don't know if they will. I just don't want them to have any power or influence. I think that if Trump wins, they'll be emboldened. They'll be like, "Oh, we were right because we won the election. We took this country back." And in whatever lizard brain that they're calculating all this, that's going to be seen as a validation for their current trajectory. But if he loses, then it's going to reinforce the narrative that he's just bad for Republicans because he just keeps making them lose, given the successive election losses over the years. Of course, he can always claim that he won the 2020 election, and just to clarify, just so no one assumes otherwise, you don't believe that he lost. You don't believe that he won the 2020 election.
No, I have no reason to believe that.
And you're also vaccinated for COVID.
Yeah.
You believe in the efficacy of vaccines.
Yeah. I mean, in general, certainly, and I believe this. Whatever the latest official numbers on the efficacy of the COVID vaccine, that would be my default position until I see some very specific and concrete reason to believe that that's not true. But yeah, I think that the vaccines are good. I would recommend that somebody who hadn't gotten the COVID vaccine should get one, particularly if they're in a vulnerable population.
Yeah, so these are examples of the problems that I see. Like vaccine hesitancy is now overwhelmingly a right-wing phenomenon, particularly among MAGA supporters. I don't know. It's weird that it even got that way, given the immense credit I would give Trump's Operation Warp Speed. We don't have to get into that. The other problem is just like how many people genuinely believe still that the election was stolen. Like I see these as very toxic beliefs because they're not tethered. I mean, one, they're not truthful. They're just tethered in delusion, and over time, I think they'll just die off. Like a lot of Republicans that didn't take the vaccine just died. Like I don't care about what happens to them from that standpoint. That seems to be like it's almost like it's a survival of the fittest. It's a Darwinian shedding off. That's fine for me, but I'm worried about how long that would take to really shut off these toxic and diluted ideas. That's my concern, and I don't want that reinforced. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, no, I understand completely, and I understand how, given your set of factual beliefs, your, conclusions make sense. If I believe those things, I would probably also not be voting for Trump.
But you do believe, we do share some beliefs. Like you believe vaccines are effective. Are you concerned that so many of Trump supporters don't?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's a problem. I have a different diagnosis of the cause of the problem, basically. I think Trump is essentially a symptom and not a cause would be my diagnosis, right? And I think that the ultimate cause of it's always there. I mean, it's not to be too elitist, but like, I don't think there's ever been a time in history when like the average person on the street had like a really careful, like well-grounded view on like scientific issues or something, right? I think that, it matters more that decision makers are well-informed than it does that, people, basically it matters how well-informed someone is scaling with how much power they have. But I think the cause of, what we can all agree is a rise, at least in conspiratorialism. And there is some extent to which it's cross-partisan, but certainly I think there's more of at least a certain kind of it on the right. I think the cause is the failure of our social sense-making institutions, right? If you're somebody who, you don't have a lot of academic training, right? You can't read through the methodology section of a social science paper and notice, errors or oversights, right? You're someone who's simply not capable of directly assessing the probability of being true of various, scientific claims. You can't do that. It's unlikely you'll ever be able to do that in your life, right? You rely on outsourcing those parts of your epistemology to other people, right? And the problem is that our sort of official sense-making and consensus-building institutions are so ideologically captured, and they say certain things that people know are false, right? So if you are such a person, right, and you have no way of really figuring out the truth one way or another, but that this group of people, which is going to be sort of a vague assemblage in your head of smearing together a bunch of different, academics, journalists, or whatever, that at least some of the time, those people will lie to your face. How do you pick and choose, right? I'm in a very privileged position in that, like, I can read papers, right? I've spent a tremendous amount of time thinking about how we know things, and I can sort through these things myself, and I think can make good judgments about who to outsource the parts of my thinking that I can't do myself to. But a lot of people simply can't do that. And I have sympathy for a lot of these people who don't know where to turn, right? They don't know who's trustworthy. They don't know how to assess who's trustworthy. And all they know is that, the certain groups of people sometimes lie to them in really like bold, egregious ways, right? And is it any wonder that they just sort of globally stop trusting those people and end up in a wilderness, essentially, like a wilderness of ideas, and they can't find their way?
I agree with a lot of what you said. So I was against a lot of the COVID restrictions, not uniformly. Like I thought some of them made sense at the particular time. Like asking for social distancing was like okay. Some mask mandates I thought was okay in certain contexts, at least early on. But I criticized the fuck out of a lot of public health authorities because the rules that they promulgated just didn't make sense. They were contradictory. And I said, this is going to be a problem because you're losing credibility with the public. And public health authorities, they can say, please get vaccinated, or please do this, or please do that, but they don't have a way to enforce it. It's based off of just listening to them. And you only listen to them if they have intellectual authority that you can draw upon. So I agree that's a big problem, and I'm sure you and I can spend hours discussing all the ways that certain institutional captures have regressed society by just burning up their credibility on stupid, pointless pet projects that just backfired and caused like immeasurable harm. That's no dispute whatsoever. And I can extend some sympathy for those that feel, lost and lied to. I totally empathize with that, and I think that's a reasonable reaction. The problem is it just doesn't explain the gulf. So if you say, like, for why do people still believe that the election was stolen? I think it's because Trump keeps repeating it. You can say, oh, big tech censored Hunter Biden laptop story for 24 hours in October 2020, and that's why they don't trust the institutions. There's just like such a big gap between that and, Italian satellites or sneaking in ballot drops in the middle of the night or anything like that. It doesn't explain it to me because it's so delusional that I think something else is wrong. The same with the vaccine hesitancy. It's perfectly reasonable to be skeptical of institutions that have lied to. For example, Anthony Fauci lied about masks and said, he considered it a noble lie to preserve supply at the beginning of the pandemic. I thought that was a big fucking problem, and no defense whatsoever. But then to go, I'm gonna now listen to some random Twitter account that's selling silver. Like what silver as in like injectable silver?
I know what you mean. Yeah.
That doesn't make sense to me. There's something else going on. And also at the center of a lot of these conspiracies is Trump, who is just unfathomably, it's such an he's such a profligate liar. He just lies constantly. And there's something that just doesn't make sense. If you're skeptical about institutions, fine. But then for you to like place your entire trust on one man that lies constantly, that's the part that I don't get. And that's why I consider it more of a cult for a large segment of these population.
Sure. I mean, I think the primary disagreement is just how central Trump is to all of this. He's certainly a focus for it, but I think that the colloidal silver people will still be there, when he's gone, right? You're right that like lies that specifically have to do with Trump will probably lose a lot of their currency when Trump's not relevant anymore, either whether he wins, or loses. Like if he wins, nobody cares, if the 2020 election was stolen because we got what we wanted anyway. If he loses or dies or, just sort of leaves the public sphere, that won't be interesting to talk about anymore. But I fundamentally disagree that like, given that, we both can kind of accept that like these people know that, and again, these people, people are busy, right? Like they often don't have time to parse, in a really fine-grained way. Okay, these specific academics have lied to me, these specific like disciplines or fields or whatever. Like, no, they just say, okay, so I grew up being told that the guy in the lab coat will tell me true things. Now I know that he lies to me at least some of the time, so that's gone. And then they just essentially
I agree with that.
And random out of social media.
I'm not trying to like impose this like unrealistic expectation from random people that they should like crack open PubMed or whatever and like read the research papers. That's not really reasonable or realistic. The problem, if someone says institutions have lied to me too much, I don't know what to do. There's no problem with that. I sympathize with that position. The problem then is they don't just say, I don't know what to do. They say, I know I must do this crazy shit. Or I know this is the thing that happened. There's this kind of conviction that is untethered from reality. And that's a problem that I see. And that's why I want Trump to lose, because he emboldens these people. It's this sort of conspiratorial thinking. this uniformly oppositional attitude that doesn't really care about the result, that just kind of reflexive.
Yeah, again, I think that attitude is mostly directed against this, it's more negative polarization than it is, there's more negative partisanship than positive partisanship, right? And I think that even if Trump were gone, right, these people who just have a vague feeling of both being lied to and sort of condescended, again, this is descriptive. I'm not saying any of these things are good or bad, right? But they have a feeling that they're both lied to and condescended to by a sort of vague, amorphous, concept of elites that at least loosely, roughly maps onto the sort of machine that I was talking about. And I don't think that they will just sort of meekly accept the authority of that. Again, if anything, I think they will, without a singular, focus for their resistance to this, force that they perceive. If anything, it'll get crazier, right? It'll scatter and mutate into like a million different little sub-tribes of conspiracy thinking that will all sort of, bicker with each other, but also cause a ton of havoc for society, because people just fundamentally won't accept being told, sort of like how to live and what to think in this way. They just won't put up with it, and they're not putting up with it. It often looks sort of like hideous. What?
But Trump supporters are being told what to do and what to think. Like there is an insane amount of intellectual conformity within Trump circles. Like JD Vance can't even say that Trump lost in 2020 because he's just so terrified and so cucked by the man that he repeat this line. It's like, of course he won. Of course he like there. That's when you're talking about like the problems that you identify. I sympathize with them, but then I'm like, don't you see it how it applies to the guy you just voted for?
Yeah, I mean, I guess we probably have different, personal experiences relevant to this, but a lot of
we can still hash it out and dissect it and scrutinize it.
So the thing is, like, I know a lot of people who are going to vote for Trump, right? Both people who are longtime Republicans and people who, like me, are, sort of former liberals or former progressives, right? Or they might still consider themselves liberal, right? And I see a pretty wide range of opinion, right? Like I know plenty of people who are going to vote for Trump who agree with me about vaccines. I know plenty of people who are going to vote for Trump who agree that he lost the 2020 election. So yeah, I mean, like his cabinet, right? His sort of inner circle probably does face a ton of these conformity pressures, but I frankly just don't see that in the broader movement, that approximately half the country or whatever that supports his candidacy, right? I see a lot of intellectual diversity. I see a lot of openness to conversations, right?
So just to keep it grounded on free speech, I can talk shit about Trump forever. What if, let's say Trump is president? Are you concerned about actions that he will take to suppress free speech?
Yeah, I think that would be worth keeping an eye on, right? And I think that we should speak out about it when that happens, if it happens, Yeah.
Are there any that come to mind that you were concerned about?
So, he mostly seems a sort of difference in character that I see between the actions that, you sent me, an ACLU article about actions Trump wanted to take against various people or news outlets for being critical of him, right? And that would be the most likely kind of anti speech activity that I think we would see under a Trump presidency, right? I'm not saying how absolutely likely I think that is, but of all the kinds, that's the one that's most likely, right? So yeah, that would be the kind of thing to watch out for, is if he's like really in a heavy-handed way trying to penalize specific critics, either like individuals or news organizations in the media. Yeah. And
So,
if that happens, then I hope that people will speak out. I'll speak out about it. I can make that pledge now.
so you don't necessarily see him as good for free speech on his own, but you just see him as better than the alternative.
So there are a few things, right? Yes, I mean, I see him as significantly better than the alternative, right? Because like, assume that compare like if he got everything he wants versus if the other side got everything they want, right? And if he got everything he wants, then he might shut down CNN, right? If the other side gets everything they want, they will across all possible platforms prevent anyone from posting the kinds of FBI crime statistics that monitoring bias got banned for, right? And like I just see one of those as like a fundamentally, they're both bad, but one of them is drastically worse in terms of the actual effect on the country. And the other thing is that I didn't feel this way last time. I mean, my opinions were different then too, but even looking back, but I have a good deal of confidence in the people who will be in Trump's ear this time around, basically, because I think that will
Why?
be uh, the the you know the number one person he's probably going to be listening to is JD Vance, right? He's also going to take calls from Musk, right? And both of those people are strongly affiliated with Peter Thiel, and those are all three people uh, who I'm quite confident I share uh, a vision uh, for society with. So
What's that,
yeah.
what's that vision that you share with them?
The vision is a society oriented around uh, growth and progress, basically, right? Technological and economic
Can you be
progress.
more specific?
Sure, right. So I
Like,
think,
I'm in favor of growth and progress.
yeah. So one of the things that Trump has talked a lot about recently, I assume, because at least in part of the influence of these people is reducing energy costs by reducing energy regulation, right? Like we have really burdensome regulations on nuclear power right now, for example, right? The regulations are written in such.
Trump has talked about deregulating nuclear power.
I I'm trying to see. I wouldn't confidently claim that he's talked about deregulating nuclear specifically, but um, again, the people uh, who are sort of his friends this time around definitely care about that as a policy priority.
What evidence
And
do you
he's also
have?
talked about like opening up more land for fossil fuel extraction, right? So
So,
like lowering
what
energy costs, I think is like a fantastic thing for the economy. He's talked about slashing
what evidence do you have
regulations.
that he'll actually listen to? Let's assume that Vance, Musk, Thiel are all pro nuclear power and pro drilling and federally protected land. What evidence do you have that he'll actually do this?
I mean, we can't ever really know what somebody's going to do in the future, but like I
But you
think
brought
that
it up as like a reason for voting for him or supporting him,
right.
right?
I mean, so that the reason would be that there's no reason why he wouldn't want to do it. And if he does successfully lower energy prices significantly, that will make him tremendously popular. And he likes being popular. Right.
Um, okay, so it's more of a, I guess, like a hopeful projection that he'll do it this time. Did he take any steps in deregulating nuclear power when he was president previously?
No, I don't imagine it was on his radar, but I would have to look over the record to see if he did what his policy was towards other energy sources at the time. But
But, but I'm yeah, but I'm asking like, why do you think he'll like be better this time around? And you mentioned he has the ear of Musk, Deal, Vance.
yeah.
I'm trying to figure out like why, because I'm not convinced. I just don't see any reason to think that he'll deregulate. I'm in favor of deregulating nuclear power, but he didn't. He was president already. I don't know why he'll just listen to random millionaire backers this time around.
I mean, it might have never occurred to him, right? Like he may have never really thought deeply about the issue of nuclear power. And also, like a lot of times things don't get done when somebody is president for procedural reasons, right? They don't control one or the other, House of Congress, or, there are holdouts, there are a lot of reasons why things do or don't happen. And also there's just the issue of attention, right? It's just whatever he's paying attention to at the moment is what he's going to put his energy into and focus on. And I think that having a different set of people around him will influence what he pays attention to. I think that's like a pretty reasonable.
Right, but it's from my position, you can try and convince me otherwise. It just seems completely speculative and hopeful. It's wish casting more than anything else. If you can give me evidence for why he would do it this time and explain why he didn't do it last time, I could be swayed.
Yeah, I guess I'm curious, like, what that evidence could possibly look like. Like we're all sort of like, we're all just guessing what's going to happen in the future, right? Like
but we can make reasonable guesses, predictions based on prior conduct. He was president for 4 years. I didn't see any steps taken to deregulate nuclear power. And for what it's worth, like American oil production is #1 in the world. Like the United States is a net exporter. Yeah. So he says he's going to drill more, but I mean, he's just a liar. I have no reason to believe anything he says at face value unless he has a concrete plan. Like, I'm going to drill in this particular land that has, X billion gallons, drums of reserves. Here's like how we're going to deal with the potential, the Indian Reservation Tribe Treaty. Here's how we're going to deal with making sure that the land is conserved. That would be evidence that I would look for to be like, okay, this is more likely than not something that he wants to pursue. But so far, I don't think he has any platform on that. You're just kind of saying his friends like it, and I think he'll listen to his friends.
And because it would benefit his image, right? It would be hugely gratifying to him if he could, if he was more popular, right? We know he cares about being popular, right? He likes to brag about deliverables. I mean, so I guess like
he improved his image by saying that he didn't lose the 2020 election, so he could just lie again and say, especially if his target demographic is his delusional followers.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we're just running into this issue where, I agree that like he's pretty egotistical. I agree that he just kind of makes stuff up, or he'll stick to it, in the face of everything. But I don't see him as like, I don't know. I feel like you kind of see him as almost like a cartoon demon, and I just see him as like a man with a lot of flaws. And so, like, given that that's your theory of mind for him,
how do I see him?
I think I could ever convince you.
How do I see him as a cartoon demon?
I mean, like, this is just an impression I'm getting from you, but it seems to me like your view of him is that nowhere inside of him is any desire whatsoever to deliver like good outcomes for the American people, right? That weighs at like zero, right? And
I would say probably too minuscule to count, but that's based on his conduct. The number of times that he has prioritized his own interests over other people or even the country as an amorphous label. So I'm not just pulling it out of thin air. I'm basing it on what he's already done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess we just see it differently. Like, I think he's paid a tremendous cost in running for office, and maybe he didn't know that was going to happen initially. But I think hear
this talking point a lot. It doesn't prove anything. He is pursuing the most powerful position in the world. So for him to say, "Oh, I suffered so much," as a way to cast him as this altruist figure, that's not convincing. He's pursuing power.
Yeah, I mean, again, like,
in fact, you could say
that's sort of what I mean when I say you sort of see like a cartoon demon. Is that like I just don't think that like inside his own head he's just thinking like power. It's all I care about. Fuck all these people. Like I just that's not very.
Have to mischaracterize my position to make that point. Like I'm not hiding anything. I'm telling you I believe X because of Y. I'm telling you why I believe it, what I'm basing my impressions upon. You can challenge my impressions, whether they're reasonable based on the evidence that I see, or you can challenge the evidence that I presented. You don't have to strawman my position
Oh,
to make a point.
I apologize if I was doing that. What I meant to communicate, and perhaps communicated badly, is that we are looking at the same evidence, right? And we come away with different impressions of this human being. And I simply don't know how remediable by conversation that is, right? Like I look at everything Trump's done, and it leads me to one, sort of model of his psychology. You look at the same set of facts and it leads you to a different model of his psychology. And a lot of these things are just sort of like impressions, right? Like we both look at the fact that he's, it's cost him a lot, both in terms of money and probably, like the sort of comfort of his lifestyle to do these things. And you say, this is because it's worth it to him to give those things up to pursue power for the sake of power, right? And I look at the same things.
And there's some incompetence. He just, I mean, that's I don't want to get sidetracked on that. I'm happy to have that conversation. I think the gaps are bridgeable. There maybe we'll make more progress like once we look at concrete examples. So just to ground it back on free speech. So I like free speech. I don't like Trump because he doesn't like free speech. And I've offered like a bunch of examples, and I want to go through them. We can, and then we'll go through like the examples that you have from the Democrats. So for example, like he supports criminalizing flag burning. I think flag burning is expressive conduct. I think it's protected by the First Amendment. He not only wants to criminalize it, he wants to have a 1-year mandatory prison sentence.
We ought to come up with legislation that if you burn the American flag, you go to jail for 1 year.
Rarely have we seen anything like this, and I think you should get a 1-year jail sentence if you do anything to desecrate the American flag. Now, people will say, oh, it's unconstitutional. Those are stupid people. Those are stupid people that say that.
And he thinks anyone who believes that flag burning is protected by the First Amendment they're stupid people. That's what he likes to say, which includes Antonin Scalia, who ruled on the court case that protected flag burning. Do you support flag burning as expressive conduct?
Yeah, I mean, I personally wouldn't choose to ban that. I don't see it as like a really significant threat to the mimetic ecosystem because it's not, again, there's no idea that you can't express by not flag burning. I wouldn't choose to do it. I think it's a mistake, but I don't see it as like nearly as profound a threat as the things coming from the other side. Yeah.
Okay, but I'm not gonna avoid talking about the other side. Like I'm not gonna give any cover or pull any punches. But I want to focus discreetly, just like on this particular instance. Do you think that he's good on free speech on this particular topic? Yes or no?
On flag burning? No.
Yeah. Okay. Does it, for me, it provides some evidence about, again, I'm making a prediction, but it provides a modicum of evidence that he just doesn't care about expressive conduct and he's willing to invoke the power of the state to suppress it. So I don't know how far that would go. All I have is his words specific to flag burning. Do you think that's a reasonable, I guess, projection to make based on just this one point? Like that, the fact that it gives me pause, that it gives me some concern, minuscule amount, on where else he would go.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can take from that instance, sort of a distributed set of updates across other policies based on how similar they are to that thing, right? I wouldn't want to update globally against like he doesn't like expressive to this piece of evidence implies that we should expect that to the extent that something is similar to flag burning, he will not have a very libertarian position on that kind of speech. Yeah.
Okay. Do you agree with that position? Meaning, do you agree with the conclusion that you just outlined?
Do you mean do I think that his position is good, or that's an accurate description of his position?
Nothing else about Trump. If I just told you he supports 1-year mandatory prison sentence for flag burning, if you, let's just not say Trump, like politician Y, whatever. would you make, like an update based on that? Would you say I would be concerned about what else he would want to suppress?
Yeah, if that was, the only piece of information I had about somebody, I would say, yeah, that's less good than if it wasn't, than just not that, right? Yeah.
Okay. This is like what generally like how I go through it. I was just like step by step.
Yeah.
So I sent you a bunch of links about like other examples. The other one that I want to mention is that the White House reached out to Twitter and asked them to take down a Chrissy Teigen tweet because she called him a pussy ass bitch. Do you think that is suppressing free speech?
Yeah. And it's not good. And I, would like him better if he didn't do that. Or just in general, that's a negative update for me for any person who does that. Yeah.
And it causes you, does that cause you to be concerned about what else he would want to suppress?
Not profoundly concerned, but it's worth paying attention to. Yeah.
The Kamala Harris emailed Mark Zuckerberg and said, "Hey, can you take down this tweet that called me a bitch?" Would you consider that as suppressing free speech? Would that update?
Yeah, it's same effect basically, right? It makes me think the person is like heavy-handed and also kind of petty. Yeah, that would be the takeaway for anybody that did that.
So to me, this is like strong evidence because this is a guy in power who doesn't like being criticized. He's mad that someone called him a pussy ass bitch, and he's trying to use the power of his office to suppress that criticism. I see that as a big problem. Why do you think you see it as not that big of a deal?
It's the specific nature of it, I guess, right? Do I think that this would or even could just procedurally as a function of power, right? Like turn from like somebody calls and says, I saw a tweet, I don't like, take that down, to, either ban or, massively deboost any content that's critical of any administration policy in any way, right? Even if he would want to do that, or if anybody,
So it's just a matter of scale? Like he only did it once?
Yeah, I mean, it's just like basically like if that worked, right? If he did that, right? Or even if he did that like once a day, right? Then that effectively has no effect on the public conversation, right? In aggregate.
I think if a government official was successful at coercing or pressuring private entity from not publishing or repeating criticism of that official, depending on how intense that effort is, you would expect fewer criticism of that official. You would expect that to have a chilling effect of some kind.
I mean, so like the tweet in question, right? It wasn't even like some long op-ed like detailing like these are the ways in which I think his administration's policy has failed, right? It was just like a mean like statement, right? It was just somebody said like you're a pussy ass bitch, right? And like, yeah, that like again, I would prefer it if he had not done that. Like I would like him, epsilon better or whatever. But it strikes me as like it's just based on like whatever he happened to be paying attention to at the time, and it doesn't seem like the kind of thing that could become like systemic or scale in any meaningful way.
So if it was an op-ed explaining how he's a pussy ass bitch, and he asked that to be taken down or unpublished, that would be worse in your opinion, right?
I would be more concerned about that, yeah.
Okay. The other one was, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say, just as a general rule, like the more substantive a piece of speech is, the more I am concerned about its suppression, basically.
Okay. Another example was, I didn't link this to you directly, but this was back in 2021. There was something going on with the Ford Foundation. I don't even know the details, but it got some people upset. There was some dispute over a Police Lives Matter sticker. And J.D. Vance went on Tucker Carlson and said, why don't we seize the assets of the Ford Foundation, tax their assets, and give it to people who've had their lives destroyed by the radical open borders agenda?
And these foundations are the ultimate institutions of identity politics. I mean, you think about it, this is crazy, Tucker. We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in ill-gotten accumulated wealth. It serves as a tax haven for left-wing billionaires. And what do they do with this? They fund critical race theory. They fund ridiculous racism. They fund teaching 6-year-olds that they should cast off their gender. We are actively subsidizing the people who are destroying this country, and they call it a charity. It's just ridiculous.
Right. So for ordinary people, gas has never been more expensive. Simple pleasures have never been more expensive, the things that normal people need to live. But there's not even a national conversation, not even a hint that we might tax the most powerful foundations in the country. I hope you'll keep this up. When you do, how do people respond?
Look, they like it because they recognize at the end of the day, why are we allowing the companies, the foundations that are destroying this country to receive tax preferences? Why don't we seize the assets of the Ford Foundation, tax their assets, and give it to the people who have had their lives destroyed by their radical open borders agenda? Give it to the people whose lives have been destroyed by the heroin epidemic. Give it to the angel moms who have lost a kid thanks to the Ford Foundation's ideas. This is what conservatives we need to wake up about. The left is completely controlling our society through these institutions. If we don't fight back against them, they're going to make this country not a good place to live.
Amen. God, thank you. J.D. Vance, I appreciate that. Thank you for coming on tonight.
Do you think that's an attempt to suppress speech?
I apologize if this is kind of a punt, but I would have to look into the details of this situation. I don't know anything about this. I don't know anything about the Ford Foundation. And
okay. So just make
that
it
would
more
matter to me, right? That, like, the thing is, like, there are certain, there are organizations that, again, from a sort of paradox of tolerance point of view, I think are net negative for the mimetic ecosystem, in that they actively sort of lobby and work to create policies that would limit it. And I would support a fair amount of illiberalism to shut those things down. I have no idea if the Ford Foundation qualifies for this. I have no idea what any of the details are, which is why I don't feel I can comment on that one.
That's fine. If you want to just if we just want to make it abstract, there's a nonprofit that advocates for policy one, whatever it is. An official doesn't like this particular policy advocacy, so they ask for their assets to be seized. Would you consider that to be a transgression?
Again, I would depend on what policy one is. I'm non-neutral in this way, right? Like, it's not to me about
what policy would you support having a nonprofit's assets seized? What policy advocacy is bad enough that you'd support it?
I probably, I could come up with a couple examples, but the one that comes to mind right away would be if they, for example, advocated for the suppression of, like, misinformation or something, right? So if it's like a nonprofit that really has anything to do with this concept of misinformation, and that's like the main thing they like talk about or think about, then yeah, I would support it for that, because what that translates into is essentially like, we want to be the censors, and so yeah, that needs to get shut down.
So if I start a nonprofit that says, I'm concerned about misinformation, here are some ways tech companies can adopt, here are some practices tech companies can adopt to help reduce the spread of misinformation. Do you want the assets seized?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you explain that to me?
I think that the world that would be created by, like, I think that is bad. I think that organization is trying to do something that I don't want them to do. I don't want to live in the world where they succeed. And so I would like that to be stopped.
What if the nonprofit advocated using more community notes? Like having tech platforms use more community notes. That's their way of combating misinformation.
Yeah, I mean, if that was as far as it went, then no. Then the opinion would flip back the other way.
So I'm curious how you're willing to use asset seizure that is predicated on very kind of nuanced advocacy. We're not even talking about lobbying. We're just talking about nonprofit advocacy.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I see a lot of these. Basically, I'm just trying to figure out, like, at bottom, if these people got their way, right? If this organization maximally succeeded in the way it wanted to, would it result in widespread suppression of substantive speech? And if you're advocating for something that would result in that, then I'm fine with using essentially whatever tools are necessary to stop that from happening, either by just making sure that organization has no impact or by dismantling them. If what someone's advocating for is just like a better science education or something, like it's like we train scientists to become better science communicators so that they can make their own social media accounts and try to, persuade people of, why vaccines are good or something, then that's completely fine, because they're not advocating for substantive speech suppression.
So you're more concerned about, I guess, like the high potential effects of the advocacy. So a nonprofit saying, I'm concerned about misinformation, here's ways to combat it, that would be enough to place you in the targets of asset seizure.
If the methods that they were advocating involved censoring or essentially quarantining content across social media companies, yeah, absolutely, right. As soon as you are a sort of suppressive in this way, then as far as I'm concerned, you step outside the protection of the law, in a sense, in that, like, not literally, but I mean in the sense that, like, you are not part of the free speech club anymore, right? Like, rights don't exist like abstractly. They're a form of mutual insurance that we all sort of guarantee to each other. And this person has essentially just revealed that they are openly and aggressively a defector against that mutual contract. And in that case, yeah, you've left the tribe. You don't have protections, as far as I'm concerned.
Would there be any exceptions to this rule that you have in mind? Should some people be exempt from it? Like, I don't know if they're within a particular field.
No.
Let's say academics or something. Do you think academics be fired if they advocate, if they write a paper that says, I'm concerned about misinformation, here's some ways to combat it?
Again, it depends on the ways to combat it, but if any of the ways to combat it are I would not advocate any kind of retaliation against someone who makes purely descriptive claims, right, on any subject, really. If you simply study the prevalence of misinformation and you're like, this is how it works, right? We trace the meme throughout its life cycle or whatever, then yeah, that should be protected, right? But if you follow it up with, and social media companies should pursue X, Y, and Z suppressive strategies, then yeah, no, it's like, to me, that's like a very firm red line where somebody is in the enemy camp, and I don't really care
so if Facebook started suppressing, vaccine hesitancy posts, would you want to seize their assets?
Yeah. Or just, I mean, probably like you could use a less heavy-handed way to get them to stop. But the point is just that you should get them to stop doing that via, it's like the police use of force principle, right? Use the least amount of force necessary to cause them to stop doing that.
So you would be okay with seizing the assets of Trump's Truth Social company, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you be okay with seizing the assets of the GOP, the Republican Party, because they also advocated for speech suppression?
Yeah. I mean, like, where if can you point to me where that is in their platform?
Like I just mentioned, Trump wants to ban flag burning. That's expressive conduct, and he's using campaign funds to advocate for this position. Do you consider that a bright line that has been crossed, where asset seizure is allowed?
I don't really care that much about the flag burning thing, just because it's like, it's contentless. So, maybe not.
But okay, let's assume it was worse than that. Like, would you be okay with seizing the assets of political parties when they advocate for any speech suppression whatsoever?
Yeah, in general, any political party that has, as part of their official platform that they want to engage in widespread censorship, yeah, shut it down. Yeah.
Use the government to seize the assets.
Sure.
Okay. All right, that's interesting. For the record, I don't support seizing the assets, even if they ask for, even if there was like a nonprofit that just said, I want to repeal the First Amendment. That's the name of the nonprofit. I think they should be allowed to exist. I guess that would be. I'm assuming you don't, and you'd want to use police action to stop them from operating.
Yeah, if necessary. Yeah. No, I mean, to me, I sort of see your position as it's like a very noble culture, right? This culture of like truly absolute, free speech, including to advocate against free speech. But to me, it seems immunodeficient, right? It's very noble in the moment, but I don't think it's durable, right? If you don't like stop suppressive ideologies, these are ideologies that are sort of mimetically evolved to eat liberalism. And if I don't think just tripling down on that degree of liberalism will ever stop them, right? So you'll have this very principled stance for a moment until you get devoured, and then something way worse is instituted. And I think it's worth it's worth
the
taking the
enforcement
keynote.
mechanism would also be, to my mind, the enforcement mechanism would be horrendous. You'd have police officers going into a newspaper saying, "Hey, that op-ed advocated for misinformation suppression, so we're taking all your assets." I'd see that as a problem, and I don't even know if this needs to be said because it seems obvious. But if you have that apparatus in place, obviously it can be used by someone in power who doesn't like criticism. They'll say, "Oh, I'm just reinforcing the Popperian." I don't even know if I said that right. The Popperian bargain.
Yeah.
Popperian bargain that regarding tolerance of intolerance, like that we're doing this for the greater good. So I'm seizing all your assets because I don't like the political advocacy that you're making. I see that as a big problem and easily abused.
I mean, I would want it to be, I would want this policy to be very specifically defined and interpretable by courts, right? So like I support checks and balances generally as a system, and that would apply to this just as much as to anything else.
Okay. It would require like an amendment to the First Amendment.
Yeah, probably, And again, I'm not really saying this is something
how would you rewrite the First Amendment?
So
let me give you a suggestion. Congress shall pass no law, et cetera, unless it's advocating for anything that hampers this particular right.
Yeah, I would say, except for the advocacy of ideas that, for advocacy against the freedom to spread information, basically. I would need, I would want to take time and sit with this and kind of write it and probably steal some language from Popper. But yeah, I would want to, and honestly, the end result would probably be very like less poetic than a lot of our, our old legal documents are, and would be like very long and technical and legalistic. So I could really, button down everything and try to,
I was just curious. I don't expect like a full answer. Just to rattle off, like I guess some of the other things I mentioned, I already mentioned that Trump wants to take away licenses from media organizations he doesn't like. He said this many, many times. I don't even know if he probably have said it to CNN, which doesn't have a broadcast license. I don't recall if he has, but I consider that to be a problem. I don't like it when politicians want to engage in retaliatory actions against an organization just because they don't like the criticism. Do you agree?
Yeah, I agree. It's again less good than it would be if if he didn't do that.
Okay. He also has repeatedly said that he wants to expand libel laws to make it easier to sue media organizations for unfavorable coverage. I think what he implies, if you sane-wash it, is that he wants to get rid of the actual malice standard.
I'm going to open up our libel laws so when they write purposely negative and horrible and false articles, we can sue them and win lots of money. We're going to open up those libel laws so that when the New York Times writes a hit piece, which is a total disgrace, or when the Washington Post, which is there for other reasons, writes a hit piece, we can sue them and win money instead of having no chance of winning because they're totally protected. You see, with me, they're not protected because I'm not like other people, but I'm not taking money. I'm not taking their money.
So that's easier to prove defamation against these organizations. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. That's probably the one that I take most seriously of all the ones that you sent to me. right? I think that is whether or not the actual malice standard is a good idea legally. I'm sure I'm not well informed enough to really have a good opinion on that. You know, that the overall idea of making it a lot easier to sue people for libel and slander is not something I support.
Okay. And more recently this week, a few users were banned on Twitter because they posted the JD Vance dossier. Do you support that?
Let's see. If I recall correctly, it was based on I'm not saying I support this. I'm just trying to enter this into the record or whatever. I think it was the idea was based on how it was obtained, right? That it was obtained illegally or something.
Yeah, did you support the Hunter Biden suppression?
No. And in general, unless there is some law that essentially makes it such that they have to suppress things that were, obtained illegally, then yeah, I would disagree with that decision by Twitter. Yeah.
I also disagreed with the decision to suspend the New York Post for posting the Hunter Biden laptop story. I thought the story was irrelevant, but they should have the right to post it. So I strongly disagree with that decision.
Yeah.
But now Elon Musk did the same thing with the JD Vance dossier. Does that concern you?
Yeah, it's not great. I would have preferred that he didn't do that.
Would you want to seize the assets of Twitter? X?
No, because there's no better alternative right now. So if we take that away, then the public square gets worse.
So you have an additional qualification. You want to seize the assets unless there's no better alternative.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, I'm not somebody...
Substack didn't ban anyone for posting the JD Vance dossier, so that's the better alternative.
It's a slightly different kind of platform. But yeah, I mean, the thing is, ultimately, I don't, I'm not a deontologist, right? I don't think it's super important to, have... I care about, moving towards, the overall outcomes that I want for the world. And I don't care about having some list of 10 commandments or something that I apply in a totally neutral way to every situation and to every person, right?
We're talking about what world we move into, and you're describing a world where there's police officers that have the legal authority to seize the assets of newspaper organizations if the coverage violates spread of misinformation. I don't want that world. I find that to be horribly repressive. And it's going to chill speech to, I would assume, just an insane degree, because that's a serious penalty if the government, the people in charge, get to decide what counts as violating this bright line rule.
I mean, that's a risk with every law that's ever created, right? Is that people can interpret it, too broadly. But, unless we don't want to ever delegate any powers to the government whatsoever, then, we have to run that risk in some...
I never said never delegating the power whatsoever.
No, I didn't say that you said that. I'm making a point that, this is a generalizable concern. Great.
Okay. So we can, you sent me was there anything else you wanted to address on that?
No, I think we covered it.
Okay. You sent me a bunch of, I really appreciate this. You sent me a lot of sources about aspects, incidents that the Democrats or Kamala or Biden engaged in that suppressed speech. Let me pull it up. So a lot of them, I think we're just going to agree. So first one is Tim Walz says that the First Amendment doesn't protect misinformation or hate speech.
I think we need to push back on this. There's no guarantee to free speech on misinformation or hate speech, and especially around our democracy.
That's a stupid statement to make. I not only do I believe First Amendment protects hate speech and misinformation, but not only should it protect it, but that's what the law is right now. There's no hate speech exception that a lot of people seem to think. So I agree that's a stupid statement to make. Did you want to say anything more about it?
Yeah, I mean, I would say that I don't think it's just I would say it's a lot more than stupid. I think it's ominous, right? I think that this signals he's wrong about the current state of the law, but I do think that, like, especially since he's repeated this a few times, like, he's signaling what he would like to the law to be, essentially, you know. And
what if he said that spreading misinformation should come with a 1-year mandatory prison penalty?
I'm sorry?
What if he said that spreading misinformation or hate speech should come with a 1-year prison penalty?
Yeah, I mean, that's effectively the end of free speech globally, because those are such broadly defined terms that they can apply to, you know.
I find it curious that he find this statement ominous. He didn't describe a policy. He didn't describe a penalty. He didn't describe a legislation. It said the First Amendment doesn't protect the hate speech and misinformation, which is an inaccurate statement, but it doesn't give any action. Whereas Trump has described a policy banning flag burning, a penalty, 1-year mandatory minimum sentence, and legislation to wrap that up. So it's much more concrete, but you find this statement to be much more ominous. Can you explain that?
Yeah, because it's so much broader, right? Like, flag burning is one very specific, again, like, content-free activity, essentially, which, again, I would prefer not to ban it. But misinformation and hate speech, right? And again, even if we go with the interpretation that he believes that's what the First Amendment, you know, means, rather than he's saying we have, you know, a plan to do this or whatever, if they, you know, appoint enough justices to the Supreme Court who agree with them, it becomes what the First Amendment means, right? So, you know, it's the breadth of it, right? Like, on the one hand, we have this, like, setting a piece of cloth on fire. On the other hand, we have anything that we deem false or mean, right? Which is anything. Like,
okay. My own opinion is he's just dumb. He's inaccurately describing the law. If he said something much more specific, if he said, you know, we have legislation we want to pass, that would be very concerning to me. He didn't do that, so I just write it off as him being an idiot on this topic. Another one you sent me was from, like, a World Economic Forum, I think. It was John Kerry.
Short questions from lady at the back there.
Great. Hi, Gail Whiteman, University of Exeter, and the not-for-profit Climate Base Camp. I agree strongly that the need to incentivize markets is the way to move farther and faster, but could perhaps Secretary Kerry and the panelists could expand on the role of tackling climate misinformation on the solutions in the marketplace, because that seems to me that it's rife out there, both from business, investment, and consumer.
It's so tough. Everybody's wrestling with that right now. And I think the dislike of and anguish over social media is just growing and growing and growing. And it's part of our problem, particularly in democracies, in terms of building consensus around any issue. It's really hard to govern today. You can't, there's no, the referees we used to have to determine what's a fact and what isn't a fact are kind of, been eviscerated to a certain degree. And people go, and then people self-select where they go for their news or for their information. And then you just get into a vicious cycle. So it's really, really hard, much harder to build consensus today than at any time in the 45, 50 years I've been involved in this. And there's a lot of discussion now about how you curb those entities in order to guarantee that you're going to have, some accountability on facts, et cetera. But look, if people go to only one source and the source they go to is sick and, has an agenda and they're putting out disinformation, our First Amendment stands as a major block to the ability to be able to just, hammer it out of existence. So what we need is to win the ground, win the right to govern by hopefully having, winning enough votes that you're free to be able to implement change. Now, obviously, there are some people in our country who are prepared to implement change in other ways, and so that's really dangerous.
Really, if democracy can survive unregulated social media.
I think democracies are very challenged right now, and have not proven they can move fast enough or big enough to deal with the challenges that we are facing. And to me, that is part of what this race, this election is all about. Will we break the fever in the United States? Will we bring ourselves back to a regular order, as John McCain used to say, where we're able to get things done, like a budget? Pass a budget, for God's sakes. When I travel around the world, I'm pounded by people who say, what's the matter with America? Or where the hell are you guys going? And you all know, I'm not raising something new. It doesn't look good. It's not working well. And we have to be able to, and I've heard this from leaders in other countries. I won't mention their names, but some of them semi-adversarial. And they don't think our system works very well. And you look at it and you say,
your economy is going pretty well, though, John.
Yeah, but you know what? We proved in the early 1900s that robber baron capitalism can go and do a lot, and you can make a lot of people very wealthy. But if you're middle class and if you're people aspiring to get into the middle class are not able to go upwards, this has to be a race to the top, not a race to the bottom. And there's just too much bottom that's evident to too many people right now. And look at it, who got the $1 trillion tax cut? The top 1%. That just tells you the whole story. And we're struggling to get the funding we need in order to be able to build the green products and make life better for people. So I'm sorry, I'll shut up.
No, it
was a panel on climate change where John Kerry was there. And at one point, an audience member asked a question that said, when it comes to climate change, what can we do to stop the spread of misinformation? And he said that the First Amendment is a major block to combating misinformation. Can you tell me more about that?
Yeah, I mean, if you listen to the clip, like, it's very obvious, he talks about, like, it's a block to hammering misinformation out of existence, right? And how they need to,
Is it true? Is it not true that the First Amendment is a major block to stopping the spreading misinformation?
I mean, I don't think that it is a major block to, the kinds of things that would generally be taken to mean. Yes, but
it's a true statement about what the current law is.
Right, it's a true statement. I just think that, like, again, maybe these are, based on our priors, we just see very different things in these things. But, to me, it's a very clear signal that he sees this as unfortunate, right? And, like, having people in power.
Where do you get that signal from?
I mean, watching the clip in context, right?
I watched all of it.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that was my impression.
Can you explain what is clear about it? Like, what is the signal being sent, and why is it clear to you? We can play it again if you want. I can give you the timestamp.
Sure. I mean, if you want to, again, like, I watched that, right? And I see someone who thinks it's very unfortunate that we have to put up with all this climate.
Did he say it's unfortunate?
Again,
you can say my question is dumb or it's unfair. I'm trying to understand your position.
No, it's not that I think your question is dumb or unfair. I just think that I just don't know what I can say that will bridge this gap, basically, right?
Okay,
because the thing is, like, these things aren't, they don't exist in isolation for either of us, right? We both have, like, a breadth of past experiences that interpret, what we assume about other people's motives, right? And we have very different.
You're also describing confirmation bias.
Right, and everybody engages in that, but it's also, you could also call it worldview formation, right? Which is that, like, things don't exist in isolation, right? And, like, yeah, like, people, are generally bad at this, right? Nobody is free of bias, and that applies globally. But yeah, I see a pattern of behavior of people on the left saying that they see our current and they say this different ways. Sometimes they'll say, oh, we're interpreting the First Amendment wrong. Sometimes they explicitly say that, they want to get rid of it. Sometimes they just sort of, openly, oh shucks, it sure is a shame that, we have this gosh darn First Amendment, or we could hammer misinformation out of existence, right? And I see all these things together, and
Okay, but
I see a pattern of
I want to
behavior.
focus. You gave me a list of representative examples where you see a threat of free speech to free speech from Democratic officials.
Mm-hmm.
This is one of them.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see if I can rephrase my question. So we both agree that the legal standard right now, the First Amendment is a major block to combating quote unquote misinformation. The government is significantly hampered by the First Amendment from combating what it thinks misinformation is. We both agree with that, right?
Yeah.
That's a true statement. It's an accurate reflection of the legal jurisprudence right now, right?
Yes.
So how would you phrase that?
I mean, a lot of these things are based on, like the full context of what he was saying in his tone of voice, right?
Okay. Forget about Kerry, John Kerry for now.
Right.
If you told me the First Amendment is a major block to combating misinformation, would it be reasonable for me to assume that you don't like the First Amendment?
Yeah, I think it would, because I would never phrase it that way, right? I would never.
How would you phrase it?
I would say that, like, the idea that anyone should be able to authoritatively define what constitutes misinformation is misled, and thankfully the First Amendment makes sure that the state can never fulfill that role.
But that's more of if you were to just describe it neutrally, you're making an advocacy statement that I agree with. But if you just neutrally describe, here's what the law is.
No, I mean, like, the thing is, like, I don't really agree with, like, the concept of misinformation as it's generally used. Again, so, like, I wouldn't say anything. I would never say the term combat misinformation in regards to, like, the state, because I just don't think that, like, that's anything you should even want to do.
How would you phrase it? How would you phrase just a neutral retelling of what the law is as it stands?
I would say the First Amendment guarantees that the state can neither define nor take action to enforce a concept of misinformation.
Okay. And the fact that, so going back to, if you modify that statement to just say the First Amendment is a major block, is that what makes it a bridge too far for you?
Right, because, I mean, like, to me, like, that's saying that, like, there's this thing we would otherwise, possibly want to do, but this thing gets in the way of it.
Want to do?
Yeah.
But, okay, if I said the Fourth Amendment is a major block to stop and frisk, is that accurate?
Yeah, and I would also assume from you saying that you are a stop and frisk advocate. Yeah.
Why would you assume that?
It's the use of the term, like, block in that case, right? I would say, like, if somebody who doesn't like stop and frisk would probably say that, like, stop and frisk is unconstitutional thanks to the Fourth Amendment or something, right? That's still a descriptive statement, but yeah, and again, this is like, I wouldn't necessarily interpret the same words the same from any person, right?
I mean, if I said the Second Amendment is a major block to gun confiscation, to me, I'm just describing it neutrally. I'm making a straightforwardly factual statement.
Yeah, I mean, again, I really don't know what to tell you. I don't think these things can be considered in isolation and abstracting away all the details of who's saying it and, where they're saying it and what other people have said, right? I don't think that you can atomize claims in this way, right? So yes, if some other person had said the same thing, I might not have thought that they meant that, right?
Okay, so if I was like an alien and you showed me, and I didn't know what John Kerry was, and you just trying to explain, here's evidence that John Kerry wants to suppress speech, how would you make that argument?
I mean, I couldn't do it based on that clip alone, right? It's that as part of, like, a broader pattern of behavior that I see from the Democratic Party.
The clip that you sent me on this point, it doesn't tell us one way or the other whether or not he supports suppressing speech. You have to add additional factors.
I would say, yeah, with additional other factors, it reinforces that pattern. Yeah. But on
Okay.
its own, like if you were an uncontacted tribe and we taught you English and showed you this clip, you couldn't conclude it from that. Yeah.
All right. So what is the additional factor? Pretend I'm an alien that doesn't know anything about the human race. Really, just like besides like the basics. Like what's the additional factors that you would provide that you would offer?
I mean, like all the other things that I sent you, basically, right? Which is that, Harris has said that she believes that there should be uniform regulatory guidelines for all social media companies with respect to speech.
Okay. So let's discuss that.
Says that, the thing we went through with Waltz, Hillary Clinton saying that, regulating social media should be at the top of every legislative political agenda. And
Right.
the factual history of the Biden administration in fact censoring speech on social media, including around COVID measures, which we talked about, right? So they have a history of doing this, and a bunch of them talk about it, right? So in that context,
I want to discuss. Sorry, I want to discuss all of those in detail. So you sent me a video and a transcript from Harris, where this was in I think 2019, where she discusses Donald Trump's Twitter account and how she believes that it should be he should lose his privileges. I read the transcript. She doesn't mention any legislation, any policy or regulation. She just says, well, I don't want to say she just says. She explicitly says he's engaging in witness intimidation. That's a violation of Twitter's terms of service, and Twitter should enforce its rules. Which part of that do you take a objection?
I believe there was a segment where she says, like, you can't have one rule for Facebook and another rule for Twitter, right? Which is saying that, like,
this is like when Jake Tapper. I'll just read it. Jake Tapper pushes back. He says there's a slippery slope, and she says that I think that is a fine conversation for a law school debate, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about actual words issued by the President of the United States, unfiltered, which have clearly been threatening the life of witnesses to what might be a crime. The bottom line is that you can't say that you have one rule for Facebook and have a different rule for Twitter. The same rule has to apply, which is that there has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They're directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation, and that has to stop. What do you take? What do you take from that?
I mean, that last sentence, right? They're directly speaking to millions of people without any oversight or regulation, and that has to stop, right? That's clearly a statement that goes beyond the context of like just Trump's tweets in this context, right? She's saying as a general statement that social media companies need to, quote, understand their power, and that their lack of oversight and regulation has to stop, right?
Okay, so what regulation has she proposed? What legislation has she proposed?
I'm not aware of any specific piece of legislation she's put forward, nor am I sure that this would even be done legislatively, as opposed to, say, through executive action, right? But the point is, it signals a clear desire to engage in this sort of behavior.
But you don't have any more specifics about what exactly she would do?
No, I mean, how could I, right?
Well, I mean, it just feels like
nobody's going to run on speech suppression, right? As such,
Trump is running on that.
Okay, but for a thing that like just fundamentally like doesn't matter, which is flag burning, right? Like,
I know, but you, from my perspective, like you find these like ambiguous snippets by Democratic officials that could be interpreted one way or another. And then you say you have to kind of consider all of it to see how bad they are for free speech. And then I show you Trump saying we need to put people in prison for 1 year for burning the flag. And you're like, well, I don't know. It's not that big of a deal. I don't even know if he's going to follow up on it. There seems to be a discrepancy in your standards here.
I mean, the issue is basically the breadth of the suppression. That's like, I just don't care about flag burning. I don't even know that's not even necessarily like, you can call it speech, but it's also just an action, right? Like it contains no content. It restricts the mimetic landscape in no way to ban that. It just seems like a symbolic thing with no practical implications whatsoever. There's nothing you can't say because you can't burn a flag. Whereas what these people are trying to suppress is like of essentially infinite breadth, which is anything that they deem misinformation or hate speech, right?
I mean, so she doesn't talk about misinformation or hate speech in this. Let me try to make it more concrete. If someone is engaged in witness intimidation, don't think about Trump or Harris. Just saying, like some drug kingpin that says anyone who shoots up this witness will get something from me. Anyone who helps me out will get something. Do you think they should be allowed to post that on Twitter?
Yeah, I mean, I think that fits the standard for, incitement to imminent lawless action.
So let's say Harris then tells Twitter, like, hey, can you enforce your terms of service and ban this person from intimidating a witness? Do you see that as speech suppression?
No, if it didn't come with that last sentence, right?
Okay, so it's the last sentence. They're directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation, and that has to stop. That's the part that you're highlighting. Yeah. So if I was an alien, how would you explain to me as, like, what's the takeaway that I should take from this?
This person would like to create oversight and regulation for social media companies.
Okay. What is that? What kind of oversight and regulation?
Any. I mean, like it's content based, very straightforwardly.
How is it content based?
She's not talking about like they should, do they need to unionize or something, right? She's talking about the content.
Which part says it's content based, like the oversight and regulation? What's the content based?
Okay, if that's not like this, it's just. Do you think she's talking about like their energy use or what temperature they keep the office?
I'm being earnest here. I don't know what she's talking about.
Okay.
And also, she's not like a very good speaker. I'm not giving that as an excuse. She's not always quick on her feet. So I don't know what she's talking about. If she came out with a platform or has offered some legislation, then I could be, there's like more meat on the bones. But right now, I can see how it might be concerning, but she's been the vice president for 4 years. She's been a senator for however long. She has nothing in her record that presents an actual piece of legislation that is concrete and articulable enough. It's just one line in a CNN interview. In the context of witness intimidation.
Yeah, to me, it's very, very clear and very, very straightforward. And I'm happy to let the audience decide what they think about that.
Okay. So when Trump issued an executive order on how do you feel about Section 230?
Section 230, which tell me if I'm summarizing this correctly, gives social media companies immunity for illegal content posted on their site, right?
Yeah, not necessarily illegal content, but as the user, if you post on a internet platform's service, the internet service doesn't incur liability for what you say. So if someone threatens to kill someone on Twitter, Elon Musk is not liable for that threat unless there's other factors in it.
I mean, it seems practical, right? Like if speech is again something that is.
So you support Section 230?
I think so. I mean, I would want to, it's something I'm persuadable on, honestly, just because it doesn't add any kind of categories of banned speech, right? It simply relates to how these social media companies relate to speech that is already unlawful in some way under existing law. So I would hear arguments either way, but tentatively I would be pro Section 230 just for the sake of the administratability of it, right? It seems like if you
one of the examples you gave was Hillary Clinton wants to repeal Section 230. And you gave that as an example of speech suppression.
I was happy to see you cite the work of Robert Putnam. Bowling alone made an impact on me. The discussion of social capital of the sort that I'm sure the Rodhams enjoyed in Park Ridge, right? Participation, belonging, volunteerism that is so missing today. You cite Jonathan Haidt, you cite Jean Twenge. Here's what disappoints me, and it's not about you, Madam Secretary. I'm shocked that no person, no Republican, no Democrat is championing this issue. The social science is so clear. The political science is so clear. Our fabric is frayed as a nation. Our kids are disconnected. Too much time behind closed doors on devices and not enough time replicating the experience of their parents and grandparents. So what do we do about it? What do we do about it for your grandkids?
Well, Michael, there are people who are championing it, but it's been a long and difficult road to get anything done. Actually, we can look at the state of California, the state of New York. I think some other states have also taken action, but we need national action. And sadly, our Congress has been dysfunctional when it comes to addressing these threats to our children. So you're absolutely right. This should be at the top of every legislative political agenda. There should be a lot of things done. We should be, in my view, repealing something called Section 230, which gave platforms on the internet immunity because they were thought to be just pass-throughs, that they shouldn't be judged for the content that is posted. But we now know that that was an overly simple view, that if the platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor the content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real harm. It's, child porn and threats of violence, things that are terribly dangerous. So I couldn't agree with you more. We need to remove the immunity from liability, and we need to have guardrails. We need regulation. We've conducted this big experiment on ourselves and particularly our kids, and I think the evidence is in that we've got to do more. Take phones out of schools. I'm so happy to see schools beginning to do that, where the kids turn their phone in when they walk in the door. And guess what, Michael? It won't surprise you because you're on this. Kids are paying better attention in class. They are talking to each other in the lunchroom, things that used to be part of your daily life when you were a child in school.
I mean, she, again, like her comments were not restricted to that,
What she said, the issue has to be at the top of every legislative political agenda, and called for the repeal of Section 230 of the Communications Act. That's the only specific that I saw in the article that you sent me. So what am I missing?
I mean, so this line that she followed up with here, but we know that that was an overly simple view, that if platforms, whether it's Facebook or Twitter/X or Instagram or TikTok, whatever they are, if they don't moderate and monitor content, we lose total control. And it's not just the social and psychological effects, it's real life, right? Again, if you believe that if you just take her at face value and you think that is like, I don't even think that this would qualify as face value, but if you interpret that narrowly to mean all I'm talking about is the repeal of Section 230, then okay. I mean, I find that to just be a facially implausible reading of what she's saying.
How is it implausible? Section 230 is exactly about moderation and monitoring content. That's what it prevents, it allows platforms to exist without having to worry about incurring liability about what their users post. So it's directly relevant to that question. I'm confused by this.
Okay. Yeah. I can't think of anything that I could say that would bridge this gap.
Okay. So she's on the same level as Ted Cruz, Josh Hawley, and Trump, who both want to repeal Section 230.
On the issue of Section 230, which we don't agree her comments were limited to.
Did she propose, she also was a senator. Did she propose any legislation that expands beyond repealing Section 230?
No, not that I'm aware of. Again, this is not about things that people have explicitly run on or proposed. This is signaling a general belief in restrictionism for speech.
Right. If you believe that they're already planning on suppression speech, then you can interpret whatever they say within that lens.
Well, there are a lot of things they could say that I would not interpret within that lens. But yeah, you're right that people bring priors into a conversation, right?
Right. And so when I ask you for more specifics, you say, well, you also have to look at the context. And then when we go to another context, we just keeps passing the buck.
Yeah, it's the totality of evidence taken together. It's like saying it's like the old Buddhist thing about which part of the chariot is the chariot, right? Is it the wheels? Is it no, it's like the whole thing, like taken together, I think signals a very clear trend within the Democratic Party towards the idea that free speech is dangerous and probably needs to be, regulated, needs some gutter guards put on it.
I mean, there is a difference. When I tell you, here's a bad thing that Trump is planning to do, it's much more specific. I don't have to say, you have to look at the context.
Right.
Of it.
It's much more specific, but much less important, right? To me.
Okay. All right. So a big one that you mentioned, I know you doing all right on time?
Yeah, I'm still good.
Okay. So a big one that you mentioned was the lawsuit that was initially known as Missouri versus Biden, and then it was when it made it to the Supreme Court, it was called Murthy versus Missouri. Mm-hmm. This was a relatively complicated case procedurally, but this was the one that's about so-called misinformation, COVID misinformation, and the Biden-Harris administration was accused of pressuring social media companies of taking down certain information. What do you want to say about this case?
Yeah, I mean, so, if you want history of them implementing the kinds of things that I'm claiming they're referring to in those other examples, this is it, right? They, during COVID, they used all the levers at their disposal to, remove when they could, or at minimum, like massively deboost, which, is like quantitatively.
When you say they used all the levers in their disposal, who are you referring to?
The Biden administration.
Okay, which levers?
I mean, you've read the court case, right? Which is that they threatened various regulatory changes, right? They
what's a regulatory change that they threatened?
I mean, one of them was repealing 230, right?
The Biden-Harris administration threatened to repeal Section 230?
I believe so. I mean, I don't have the whole thing committed to memory.
I didn't see that when I read the cases.
I could be wrong. But I mean, here,
I don't think Section 230 ever came up in this case.
Okay, I might have misremembered that. Okay, I'll pull this up then.
I'm wrong on that. It did come up, but I don't know in what context. So this is from the Supreme Court case.
Okay.
Let me see. Give me just a moment to. This is on page 4 of the Murthy versus Missouri case. Another official unhappy with Facebook's supposed lack of transparency about its vaccine misinformation problems wrote, "Internally, we've been considering our options on what to do about it. Publicly, White House communications officials called on the platform to do more to address COVID-19 misinformation and, perhaps as a motivation, raise the possibility of reforms aimed at the platforms, including changes to the antitrust laws and Section 230. So they did do that in some instances. So I'm not sure which one it is. Do you know what happened with this case?
No.
The Supreme Court ruled 6-3 and dismissed it because they said the plaintiffs lacked standing. There's a quote from it. Well, to step back, the legal standard for when governments can pressure civilians to removing speech, there's been many cases that have addressed that. I sent you the link. I don't expect you to have read it, but there's a pending case where the NRA, with the help of the ACLU, is suing New York State, because one of the regulators that has jurisdiction over banks and insurance companies, she reached out. Her name is Mary Vullo. She reached out to various banks, Lloyd's of London, I think, and basically said, "Hey, it would be a problem if you kept offering services to the NRA." And she was explicitly anti-guns. She was very much in favor of pro-gun control, and she threatened these companies, saying, if you keep the NRA as a client, we're gonna go after you with this particular enforcement. to me, that's a clear example of coerced speech. And as a result, the other thing that's important is these companies did withdraw their services from the NRA. Mm-hmm. So you basically have three factors. You need one. You need a government speaker that has authority over the people that they're addressing. Mm-hmm. You need some sort of threat, like some sort of retaliatory action. And then the third one is that the people involved that are spoken to did change their conduct. So those are the three factors. I think it's well established in the NRA case. The problem with this case is that the Supreme Court found it was not established. Specifically, they couldn't find the link between. Well, there are a couple issues. One is they couldn't find that the government speaker had any authority over those that were being spoken to. So this is from the Amy. I forgot. Amy Court. Where was it? Justice Barrett, Amy Barrett's opinion. She wrote the head opinion. She said the primary weakness in the record of past restrictions is the lack of specific causation findings with respect to any discrete instance of content moderation. Lower courts made none. They approached standing kind of like a high-level generality, and they kind of like smushed together Twitter, Facebook into just one blob. And they didn't really make a link between, this official had regulatory jurisdiction over this company and he directed them to take down posts. That was one reason the lawsuit failed. They couldn't find the link between someone with actual authority telling a company that we're going to do this. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I understand. And, I can see why, if that's the way the law is worded, that might be a reason to throw out this lawsuit. But in terms of the substance of, was this, did they put pressure on these companies and did that cause them to change their behavior? I don't think it's really that relevant because, if the person who does have regulatory authority over these companies is also somebody that was, appointed by Biden, and this is somebody from Biden's office calling you and saying, hey, we would really like you to do this. Like, to me, it's, that person is implicitly speaking for the administration. Again, maybe not in a legal sense. I'm not making any claims.
I agree with you. That would be the case. You can make that argument. Even if the person speaking to you doesn't have direct jurisdiction or power, if they're speaking from an administration, I think it's reasonable to draw the line. I agree with that. Yeah. The second factor was like them bringing up the Section 230. That's, I think, clear evidence of them trying to create some sort of oppressive or coercive environment, like comply with this or we'll rethink this.
Yeah, I think the antitrust stuff too, that's like, if anything, even more threatening. It's like, we'll break you up, like.
I agree with you. And I concede this point. I think the biggest problem with the case is that they were asking them to do things that the platforms were already doing. Yeah. This is from the opinion, page 2. In 2016, Facebook began fact-checking and demoting posts containing misleading claims about elections. Since 2018, Facebook has removed health-related misinformation, including false claims about a measles outbreak in Samoa and the polio vaccine in Pakistan. Likewise, in 2019, YouTube announced that it would demonetize channels that promote anti-vaccine messages. So the tech companies were already on board with this. They were already doing this. Because maybe to make it more concrete, when like a government entity talks to the public, it's not necessarily coercion. So to give you like some examples, let's see where it is. Like an example would be, like if the police department talks to the media and says, we asked media outlets to delay reporting on certain details of the crime for 48 hours to aid our investigation. That, would you consider that speech suppression?
No.
I would consider that like an attempt at speech suppression, but I wouldn't consider that impermissible because like the newspapers can choose to ignore them. And also it's a reasonable request that is fairly narrow and time limited, time bound.
Yeah.
I mean,
I would also say, sorry to just interject really quick, whether or not I would consider it speech suppression would also depend on like if there had been like a history of newspapers that didn't do this, like the reporters getting all their windows smashed in an event that never gets invested, you know, that kind of thing, right? If it's understood in context to be a threat, that would be a reason to change that judgment. But absent that, yeah, I agree with you.
That makes sense. You can draw think of other examples. We advise against publishing the names of undercover operatives for their safety. It's a request at suppressing speech, but it's, for the same reasons. It's like time-bound and reasonable. If you want to make it, broaden it out to public authorities, if a public authority asks a newspaper, can you please not print false information about vaccines? If they left it at that, would you consider that coercive?
It would definitely be closer to it. It's more coercive along the continuum. Yeah, because especially if it's let's say that this statement is issued by the mayor of a city, right? And this mayor,
I said public health authority.
Okay. Again, then the case, the argument in that case would be the extent to which the one assumes that the public health authority is speaking sort of as an organ of the broader administration, which would have the power to punish.
If we assume that they have no regulatory power whatsoever, I'm just making that assumption for the sake of argument. Do you see anything wrong with just the government asking, with as nicely as possible, hey, can you please don't spread this? It's causing us problems. I'm trying to think of another example. They could say, can you please not repeat these rumors about someone peeing in the water reservoir because last time it cost us $3 million to empty it. Something like that. Do you consider that speech suppression that is coercive?
It potentially could be. Yeah. I mean, the better way to approach that would just be to, you could say nobody has peed in the public water supply, and, the people who said this, also have a history of lying about, X, Y, and Z. So maybe they're not trustworthy. Right. But as soon as you're sort of issuing, commands or even, requests, I do see it as a problem, right? The government can speak themselves and make their own case, but I don't think that they should, tell or even ask other people to be quiet, because when you are, even if you're, a representative of the government whose specific agency has no regulatory power, right?
But you just agreed that it's okay for the government to tell others to be quiet in the context of, ongoing investigation and national security or undercover operatives. You do agree it's okay in some instances, right?
Yeah. I mean, in those, in the case of undercover operatives, there's a very clear, compel, but honestly, that shouldn't be really what's relied on to prevent that from getting out, right? It's just asking. I
agree. I'm not judging the efficacy. I think that would be kind of like a hopeless directive. I'm just trying to work out, when is it okay for the government to tell people not to say something, absent any threat of they're not being strong-armed. It's just framing it as a simple request.
Right. And see that what I'm sort of not so sure about is that that's ever possible. Right? Because if you're speaking on behalf of the state, right, which has a monopoly on violence, then I think that all of these statements, I at least wouldn't trust any, I don't think you could cleanly separate out the cases where there is versus is not an implied threat. Right? Because, you see this with prosecuting mafia cases all the time, right? It's it sure would be a shame if something, you can always reword things to avoid any explicit standard, right?
Well, I gave you an example where I think it's much clearer. You have Mary Vullo, the head of Department of Financial Services in New York. Yeah. She has legal authority, legal jurisdiction over the companies that she's reaching out to. And she threatened, she was kind of dumb about it. She was much more she did it in a transparent way, right? But there's a clear difference in we can argue about where the line of coercion is, but I think you'd agree that there's that her conduct was clearly egregious.
Oh yeah, of course. And it was more clear. I'll say that, for sure. I'm just also concerned about, cases where essentially people are smarter about it, right? If anything, those are more dangerous.
Sure, I can understand that, but I'm just trying to figure out, if I was the government, which I'm not, how would I approach this if I want certain things, certain message to be to spread more than others? We already conceded that it's okay under some very limited circumstances, and I'm trying to figure out where, we agree telling the media, please don't reveal details of the investigation, as pretty please, like, we're not threatening you with anything. That's okay. Mary Vulu, fuck her, that's not okay. So I'm trying to figure out where, we don't have to get the exact line, but where would we be to try to...
I mean, if I were required to draw a line, I'd probably be happy to sacrifice the case of please don't release the details about these cases, right? In that, like, I just generally don't think the government should be in the business at all of trying to control the narrative through public.
Okay. All right. I think that's an admirably principled position. So going back to the COVID misinformation case, what is it? Does it change your analysis when by the fact that the big tech companies were already on the hunt for this information?
Yeah, I mean, so it does in a way that it sort of makes it more frightening to me, in that the issue with this is why I sort of opened by saying that, like, I care about, substantive and not just legal free speech, which is that, like, the thing I'm really concerned about is that in a lot of cases, there won't really even be need for explicit, coercion by state actors in order to achieve a broadly suppressive speech environment if there's a sufficiently uniform culture in most of the powerful institutions in our country, right? If most of the big tech companies, if almost all of the universities, and on top of that, also a sufficient amount of the state, all agree with, with this, sort of, with this ideology of equity, and also of, essentially unlimited deferral, what, I don't know what the right form of that word would be, deference to experts, right? This sort of package of ideas, if everyone just agrees with that independently, right? And like this, it's not broadly accepted by, like most of the population or anything. But if the people who control all these major institutions agree, they don't even need to coordinate, right? They don't need to explicitly coordinate with each other. They will all just take actions that are consistent with this belief system, and the net effect of which will be a very suppressive environment. So yeah, no, I almost wish it had required state coercion to get Facebook to do that, right? The fact that they would do it without it is more concerning.
So you frequently try to evaluate the value of the speech being suppressed. So what's the value of, let's say, vaccine hesitancy? Any information that causes vaccine, for the sake of argument, let's assume it's false information about vaccines. What's the harm in suppressing that?
I mean, so you've kind of assumed away the part that is where I think all the meat is, basically, which is assume that it's false, right? Which is that, like, I think that a lot of times people make, and I think we saw this with COVID, experts will make what will overstate their confidence in claims, right? And even if the claim has like a 60-70% chance of being true based on the available evidence, they'll state it as if it were 100%, and like completely beyond any kind of questioning. So like what that speech exists to do is both to sort of counterbalance the overconfidence of the, sort of the academic and regulatory narratives, and also to hopefully incite. You want to maintain
a robust mimetic ecosystem. I understand that part.
Yeah, and also hopefully to incite those experts to explain why they think what they think, right? And to interface more with the public in more of a discursive rather than dictatorial way.
Right, but that's a downstream. You're making an argument about the entire ecosystem. Is there, just for the sake of argument, if we assume it is false, is there any value lost by suppressing it?
I mean, so once, if you had, if you had absolute certainty that a claim is absolutely false, then I'm not sure there would be a huge amount of harm in suppressing it. The entire issue, of course, is like what processes produce certainty, right? And like it's a conditional that I think is basically never met.
Okay. Because I noticed, like, when I bring up the examples from Trump, you're like, well, it's not that big of a deal. The value of the speech that's suppressed is minimal or inconsequential.
Yeah, well, yeah. Okay. So,
because I can do the same thing. I can fall back to process the same way you are.
Sure. So I guess the principle underneath what I'm trying to say is that any thought, right, should be like, if any representation, right, any set of ideas should be expressible, right? In under whatever rules exist, it should be possible to express any given belief essentially about the world. And preventing flag burning doesn't prevent the expression of any belief.
Okay. What about preventing expressing the belief that Trump is a pussy-ass bitch?
I mean, probably like 10,000 people said that day, right? So like it's still getting out there. But I agree, it was bad. That was bad. I would want that not to happen. Yeah, people should be able to express that.
Okay. So let me see. I noticed there's sort of like an oscillation between evaluating the value of the speech and evaluating the value of the ecosystem instead, or like the mechanism.
I would dispute that it's about evaluating the value of the speech. It's about making sure that I'm trying to make sure the library of expressible ideas is as broad as possible, right? And like if you can't express it. So like, I'll give you an example of something that I don't think would have any significant effect on the mimetic ecosystem, right? So we ban the use of the word fire hydrant, right? Very specifically, right? You can get around that, right? You can say like red fire thing that, whatever, like you could just describe it in other terms, right? But you could express the exact same ideas, right? And the thing is like, prohibiting like specific symbols or something, like there's no using the letter R anymore, right? We could get around that, right? The prohibiting specific symbols is sort of the category I see flag burning in that like no part of the landscape of possible beliefs has been carved off as inexpressible. It's just one particular sign or symbol has been carved off, but you can still say, I think America is bad, right? I think America's effect around the world is bad. I think America is, a foundationally bad country because it was founded on, you can say all those things, right? There's no piece of content that you can't say. So I'm not saying
your argument, I think you mentioned this before, is like, as long as there's like another outlet, the harm is not as bad or minimized.
I don't mean outlet as in like another platform or something. I mean another way to say the exact same thing in different words, basically.
I'm referring back to an earlier argument that you made, where as long as you have like another outlet where that conduct is permissible, then it's not as bad.
I mean, just functionally, as a matter of fact, it is less suppressive to the public conversation for, like there are diminishing marginal returns, right, for each additional big social media platform that's totally free. There are still returns, right? Positive, right? I would like them all to be free. I'm just saying, like, as a matter of fact, we're in less, the danger decreases massively when you go from 0 to 1. And then there's still a lot, but less of a gain when you go from 0 to 2. So that's just as far as I'm concerned, like a descriptive statement about the effect of these things on speech chilling.
Yes, if we take it from like that perspective, if I ran my own social media platform, even though I'm a free speech maximalist, I guess it would be slightly different from how Facebook and Twitter sort of used to be, how the kind of rules that they would impose. It's just because it's hard to find rules that benefit everyone. And if we're not, if we're looking at, give me a second. If I'm trying to think of what ideas are not allowed to be expressed, period, because a lot of the focus seems to be more on reach. Like, I want to post on this particular platform because it has more people than anywhere else, and then complaining when you don't have access to that specific platform. There's a sort of entitlement inherent in that request, because you can Substack doesn't. I don't even know like what Substack bans for really. It's there's all sorts of crazy shit on there. Very easy to ignore. So we have Substack. People can post whatever they want, whatever vaccine information or misinformation they want. It seems like more when people want access to a particular platform and they are denied that by the platform owner, then that's when they complain. And that's the part that I don't have much sympathy for.
Yeah, I mean, to me, the issue is that, like, I do think that sometimes things that are true also get caught up by these suppressive policies, and reach is a decent measurement of substantive free speech, really. That's like a decent unit to put to it, basically, because if, like, technically you're allowed to post something, right, in that you can hit the post button and it will go up, but they prevent anyone from seeing it at all, you don't really have any substantive free speech. And if it's just they let one person see it, right, you have almost none, right? So I see this as a quantitative thing, right? And like, to the extent that obviously, you don't, like, not everyone, has a right to be handed a 1 million follower account or something, but to the extent that they explicitly put their thumb on the scale to reduce the reach of certain speech, I see that as like a sort of just a sliding scale version of censorship, essentially, where they're like, we are 50% censoring this or whatever.
Well, I guess what level of entitlement are people, what level of reach are people entitled to?
Again, this is not so much this.
Let me see if I can rephrase that. What is like the right, what factors or metrics do you look for to see this is an appropriate amount of reach that this person's entitled to? Like, if I have like an account with 1 follower, should I expect billions of people to see my tweet? Should I be entitled to that? Like, I'm trying to figure out what's proper here.
I would look at the algorithm and see whether they're, the way they prioritize things in people's feeds are content-based or not.
Okay, what if my content is boring and it gets, because all I post is like a yarn ball, like multiple times every day, and I don't get billions of views? Is that suppression?
No, I mean explicitly content-based in the algorithm, right? You look through the code base and there's something that relates to content, as opposed to like only being related to, sort of engagement-based metrics, right?
I mean, engagement has to do with content. Like, if I post something boring and my tweets don't get boosted, is that suppression?
No, but if they explicitly had something in the code that says any pictures of yarn balls get -5 priority points, right? Then that would be, yeah.
Okay. So those, did you want to say anything else about the Supreme Court decision?
I don't think so. And I am going to have to go here pretty soon.
Okay. You want to wrap up? Any final thoughts? You can have the last, well, you can see if you want to have the last word, or if there's any other topics you wanted to discuss.
Oh yeah, no, I don't have any gotchas to throw in at the end. I just wanted to thank you again for having me on. I know there's a lot of maybe a little amount of value distance and a lot of worldview distance between us, but I still found this very productive and interesting. So thank you.
I did too, and I commend you for being willing to scrutinize yourself to this level. Very few people are willing to do that, so I respect that. I appreciate you for your time.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Cheers.
All right. Thank you, Hunter.